Okay, if we can make a start, if those who want to take a seat can take a seat. Welcome to the overview and scrutiny consideration of two call-ins in respect of the decision to appoint a preferred bidder. Right, I'm going to draw people's attention to the normal notice about filming at meetings. This meeting is being webcast, so note that it may be filmed or recorded by the Council for live or subsequent broadcast on the Council's internet site or by anyone attending the meeting using any communication method. Although we ask members of the public recording, filming or reporting on the meeting not to include the public seating areas, members of the public attending the meeting should be aware that we can't guarantee that they will not be filmed or recorded by others attending the meeting. Members of the public participating in the meeting should be aware that they are likely to be filmed, recorded or reported on. So by entering the meeting room and using the public seating area, you are consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of these images and sound recordings. As Chair, I have the discretion to terminate or suspend filming or recording if, in my opinion, continuation of the filming, recording or reporting would disrupt or prejudice the proceedings, infringe the rights of any individual, or may lead to the breach of a legal obligation by the Council. I just want to go round the table, so everyone who's sitting around the table here introduces themselves. I'm Councillor Charles Wright, I'm Chair of the committee.
Hi, I'm Councillor Pippa Connor. I chair the Adults and Health Scrutiny Committee. I'm also a Vice Chair on this committee.
Philip Slaughter, I'm the Clerk.
Councillor Kirsten Hearn, Chair of the Children and Young People's Scrutiny Panel.
Councillor Amina Ibrahim, Chair of the Housing and Regeneration Scrutiny Panel.
Councillor Makbule Gunes, Chair of Community Safety and Environment Committee.
I'm a non-voting rep on this committee. Lucy Davin, Parent Governor Representative.
Councillor Bob Hare, and I'm bringing call-in 1 to the meeting.
Richard Grice, I'm Assistant Director of Transformation and Resources at the Council.
Jonathan Bull-Diamond from Turnberry. We're commercial advisors to the Council on the establishment of the HDV.
I'm Dan Hawthorne, Director of Housing and Growth at the Council.
I'm Alan Strickland, Cabinet Member for Housing, Regeneration and Planning. Chair, you might want to remind us this is not a pantomime.
Can I remind the gallery that it's not appropriate to shout out at members here, and if the meeting, if we're not able to carry on the business of the meeting, I do have options either to ask individuals to leave, to adjourn the meeting for a short time, or to clear the gallery. And I do want to make that clear because we have a lot of business to get through, and shouting out doesn't really help. As I just said, shouting out doesn't really help, and if you're going to continue to do that, I do have the option to ask you to leave the meeting.
Julian Wayne, Project Advisors to the Council.
Scott Morrison, Pinsent Masons, External Legal Advisors to the Council.
Stephen Lawrence, Legal Advisor to the committee.
Michael Kay, Democratic Services and Scrutiny Manager.
Right, are there any apologies for absence? No. There's no urgent business permitted on this agenda. Do members have any declarations of interest they need to make? No? Good. Right, I'll do a very brief introduction. I did just say we can't tolerate shouting out, and if that continues in this way, I will have to consider the options. And I think it would be in the interests of everyone in the gallery, and I thank everyone for coming because these are important matters, and it's right that they're heard, and that everyone in the gallery, as well as people here, can have the opportunity to hear, and for people here to make their points. And if that's proving impossible, I will have to consider the options that I've outlined. So if you bear with us, please, let us get on with the meeting. Thank you. Brief introduction. We're here to scrutinise the Cabinet's decision to accept a recommendation for a preferred bidder for the HDV. Now, that decision cannot be implemented until we've undertaken this scrutiny, but the Scrutiny Committee itself is not taking that decision. The call-ins specifically relate to the decision taken on the 14th of February, i.e. the appointment of the preferred bidder and agreement to proceed to the preferred bidder stage in the process. And the committee can note the process that's set out in the monitoring officer's report. Neither call-in is claiming the original decision is outside the budgetary or policy framework of the council, though we can take our view on that in due course. There are three possible outcomes to the call-in within the procedures that that are set down. Those options are that this committee does nothing, in which case the decision is implemented immediately. We can ask the full council to undertake the role of scrutinising the decision, i.e. we can send the decision to the full council, in which case under the procedure the full council either accepts the decision or itself sends it back to the Cabinet. And our third option is indeed to send it back to the Cabinet to think again, with or without recommendations which we may make. The way the meeting is going to go, I'm going to ask the lead members of the call-ins to introduce their call-ins, and there'll be questions from members. The Cabinet member will be asked to respond briefly to the call-ins. I should have said before that there are two deputations, actually, and we'll take those first, and there'll be questions from members, and also if the Cabinet member wishes a brief response to those deputations. Part of the material that went to the Cabinet to inform its decision was exempt material under the law. In order for us to scrutinise that aspect of the decision, we will need at some point to go into private session to review that matter. What we'll do is I'll announce that, and we'll go off to another room to do that rather than ask everybody else to leave. We'll keep that as brief as we can, and then we'll come back. So, right. Yep, sorry, keep it quiet up there, whoever it is.
Security guard.
Right, if security cannot have their radios on. Okay, I'm going to proceed to the first deputation. It's Nick Martin Clark and Paul Burnham. 5 minutes for the deputation and a short time for questions after. So, you ready to go?
I don't want to go over my time, so I'm keeping track of where I am. Okay, I'm Nick Martin Clark. I'm the treasurer of the Haringey Leaseholders. Sorry. Is that better? Okay. Hello, everybody, and thank you for allowing us to come. My name's Nick Martin Clark, and I'm the treasurer of the Haringey Leaseholders Association. And I'm, very pleased to be here today with my friend Zenek, who's from the Love Lane estate and who's a leaseholder there, but also with Paul and, the tenants as well. This is very much a leaseholders and tenants point of view put jointly. Okay, well, the first thing I want to say is that we were in the High Court yesterday, the HLA, and we had a very significant day, a very big day for us. We came away with a victory. And we've won permission in our judicial review, which is to do with a leaseholder-specific issue. But I want to talk about the two grounds on which we won permission today, because they're relevant to the HDV. The first ground on which we won permission was consultation. And we're saying that the consultation on our issue was flawed, and the court held that that was arguable. And the reason I mention that is because a point I want to make is that there has not been enough buy-in by residents into this whole HDV thing, and that is very much to do with the flawed consultation, which is across the board. It's a big issue for everybody, and it's particularly a big issue, I want to say, because the whole HDV idea arises from the Housing Futures Review, which was when it was first proposed, and the consultation involved in that Housing Futures Review was flawed for two very big reasons. The first reason is that it should have been run in tandem with another big consultation which was held on the resident engagement strategy, but it wasn't. The two were separate. It should have been run in tandem because the resident engagement strategy consultation was about how the resident involvement structures were going to be radically changed under the new 10-year contract for Homes for Haringey, but that should have been put on the table when people were asked whether they wanted to have a new 10-year contract with Homes for Haringey, and that was the Housing Futures Review consultation. So that important whole area was not included. When people were asked, do you want another 10 years of Homes for Haringey, they assumed that it would be done under the old system with the old resident involvement structures, which were, in theory and quite often in practice, excellent. But they've all been abolished, to be honest, and the Homes for Haringey structures that we now have are completely different. So that it was flawed for that reason. It was also flawed because the new management agreement was not presented to people to discuss. They were asked if they want another 10 years with Homes for Haringey, but they weren't told what the new management agreement was going to look like. They weren't even told that the new management agreement was going to be very different, and it is really different. And it's a bit sneaky because it takes away tenants' ballotable rights. Normally, they would have to be balloted if the Almo was taken back in-house. And this way, the Almo is not taken back in-house, but they've got such a radically different agreement that they're allowed to shift estates in between, in and out of the Almo, back to the council, and that fits in with the HDV. And that means that instead of people being asked and given a vote on whether or not they want to go back to the council and therefore be handed over by the council to the HDV for redevelopment, it happens without them getting a ballot. And that means they don't have any real say, and that means they don't get any chance to find out what the real deal is, and they're pushed around. And that's a big problem with consultation. I'm sorry, I know I'm running out of time. So the other thing I want to say is the other ground on which we won was that Homes for Haringey does not actually, at the moment, have a legally valid contract with Haringey Council. They've messed up on the contract expired on the 31st of March last year, and they didn't extend it properly, and they had to extend it properly because they can't just do what they want. This is not two private contracting parties. There is a public interest, and there's a regulator there to regulate that public interest, and they didn't ask the regulator's permission for their informal rolling over of a contract that should have been extended properly. So there's a big, serious legal issue there for Homes for Haringey, and the reason I want to mention that is that that is a gross incompetence. And one of the conditions of renewing Homes for Haringey's contract was that they continued to show a high standard of leadership. They failed categorically, and that means that there will be a challenge to any renewal of that contract if it is undertaken. And I suggest that this is a political issue, but deep down, and it's better for politicians now to get hold of it and look at it properly, rerun the consultation, get the resident buy-in that you need before you start hammering this thing forward. And don't leave it to legal cases and upset further down the line. Take the chance now to have a proper rethink. You've gone too far too fast.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add anything at this stage, or shall we put questions? Paul, do you want to?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair. What I'd like to talk about is something outside of Haringey. I think we all know that this process is about something much wider than just Haringey. It's certainly about the future of London and about people's rights, working class people's rights beyond that. I'd just like to remind the scrutiny panel that the government's National Estate Regeneration Programme was launched by David Cameron when he said that he was going to knock down 100 of the worst estates, and he ended up by saying there's no obstacle that we that we can't knock down and demolish. And the key thing about that as well is that the amount of money that the government was going to spend on doing that work, on knocking down our estates and our homes, was what's described as seed corn money, very small amount of money. And what Cameron and his friends said was to local authorities was, when you knock down and regenerate estates, when you improve areas by knocking down council estates, you need to go to the private sector for your funding. And we know what then happens to that in terms of the promises that are made. Now, Cameron and the consultants all say, guess what? Residents' rights are going to be protected. They all say, guess what? Residents have got a right to return. But when it's Cameron and the Tories, when they put no money in, when they tell you to go to the private sector and the developers to get funding, what does that mean about the promises? It means that the promises are worthless, friends. It means that the promises are not going to be kept. And that's the issue you need to look at. Furthermore, and just turning to Haringey in particular, we could go on for a lot more than 2 or 3 minutes, but I won't do, about the consultation, because the consultation follows from what Cameron and his friends are doing, follows to what the developers are doing to this city. So when we heard, as we've done in the last few weeks, Claire Cobra and Alan Strickland make the most beautiful promises, the most wonderful promises and guarantees that we all know are not in the council's declared policy, not in the council's adopted policy. Why not? Because they can't afford it, as they call it. Why not? Because those promises would not allow the developers to make the profits they expect. That's not acceptable as a form of consultation, because Claire Cobra and Alan Strickland are the representatives of this council. I have to say they must be obligated to speak to what the actual policies of the council, and not just tell people what they'd like to hear. Telling people what they'd like to hear is two things. I'll just wind up on this. There are many other examples of this, Charles and friends, many other examples, but there's 2 problems with the strategy that's been followed. One is that it's morally wrong. It's wrong in terms of us and our homes. And the other one, that it exposes the council to legal challenge and to disrepute. Therefore, this committee must think again, must tell the council to think again, send the strongest message back to the Cabinet, but you must not go ahead with the HDV at this time. You must pause to allow for further scrutiny and consideration of what's actually being proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. I'll just, any questions from members?
Please do ask us a question.
Councillor Connor.
Hi. I had a question for Nick, and it's around the consultation process that you were asking for. So are you saying that you are asking that this should have happened before a preferred bidder was named, or are you saying that during this process between the preferred bidder and the HDV becoming set up, that a proper consultation process should take place with the residents? I wasn't quite sure from if you could just explain a bit further. Thank you.
What I'm trying to say is that the whole idea of the HDV, before you sort of get to the preferred bidder stage, originated from the consultation called the Housing Futures Review in the year 2015. And it finished with, I think, in October that year. And that was, that was a comprehensive and quite impressive exercise, but it was flawed. And the idea is that you wouldn't get the HDV. The HDV came as part of a package. Homes for Haringey was going to have another 10 years. It wasn't going to be able to do everything, so you needed the HDV as well. And that was what the future was, rather than going back in-house. But if that consultation was flawed, then the whole idea of the HDV has to be looked at again. It's not consultation about a preferred bidder. It's a consultation about, is that the right way forward, or should it come back in-house? All the options need to be looked at again if that consultation, the Housing Futures Review, was fundamentally flawed. And I'm saying it is, for those 2 reasons that I mentioned. And that is why, at this stage, we've now got a lot of resident disquiet. Because what I'm saying is, if you'd got the consultation right, at that point, when you first introduced the HDV, people would understand more what it was about, and they would have been on board, and you wouldn't have what you've now got, which is a sort of, which is a kind of panic once the stable door's been shut, the horse has bolted effectively.
Okay, any further questions from members? Right. Okay, thank you for that. I'll ask the next deputation, Adrian Weir. Sorry, to respond briefly to the deputation points, then we'll move on to the call-ins. So is Adrian there? If Adrian can come up to the table, if you don't mind moving off so that Adrian can get in. And thank you for coming, and thanks for that.
Chair, I've only just met my colleague here from the GMB union. We've only met in the hallway. I didn't know we were a joint delegation, but anyway, deputation, but we're here together. I think I'm going to speak first.
Okay, right. My name's Danny Spencer. I'm the workplace organiser for GMB Haringey, and I'm speaking on behalf of the local GMB residents in Haringey. What we would like to know is why Haringey Council would want to go into partnership with a company called Lendlease, who have a history of anti-trade unionism and blacklisting construction workers. We just can't understand why Haringey would want to choose this company who hasn't got a very good reputation. And not only that, if there was such a great company, why are they paying out millions in compensation? A lot of these construction workers, I think it's about 5,000 altogether, that have been blacklisted by Lendlease and other construction companies. It's had a devastating effect on their families and themselves, and they haven't been able to find work for years because of being blacklisted by this company. So we just can't understand why Haringey has gone into partnership with these guys. And as far as we're concerned, we just think the council would be better served if they went into partnership or worked with Chaka Uma in making sure that companies that Haringey work with or involved with do not blacklist construction workers or any kind of workers for standing up for their rights. And we just, and wasting £2 million with working with Lendlease.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. My name's Adrian Weir. I'm a Haringey resident, and I'm also the Assistant Chief of Staff with Unite the Union, the principal union for workers in the construction industry. And can I start this evening by thanking the Chair and members of the committee for allowing me the opportunity to make this short presentation. Chair, from the end of the Second World War, international assemblies of nations, including the United Nations and the European Council, have guaranteed workers the right to form and join unions, to be active in that union, and for that union to be able to collectively bargain with those workers' employer. And further, our Parliament has recognised, though, that particularly with construction employers, that these employers may try to subvert these international human rights, and have legislated in 2010 specifically against the blacklist. It was clear as long ago as 2006 that secret lists of trade union activists were being compiled by a shadowy outfit called the Consulting Association. Workers seeking a job on a building site would have their names relayed to the Consulting Association, and if you'd been active in your union and the Consulting Association had your name on file, then most likely you would not be given a start on that site. And I commend to the committee a report written by Professor Keith Ewing of King's College London that exposes the evil of the Consulting Association and the construction employers that subscribe to its services. But blacklisting is much bigger than just damaging, as my colleague has said to you, damaging to family life of construction workers. Blacklisting is a form of collective intimidation. It sends out strong signals to everyone in the industry that if you stand up for your rights and the rights of others, then sooner or later no construction firm will take you on. And so in 2013, the unions issued High Court proceedings against many construction employers over blacklisting claims. And last year, 3 years later, 2016, out-of-court settlements ensured that many members received financial compensation. But there are other issues determined by order of the court that remain outstanding. So don't let anyone tell you that this is all over. And I can confirm tonight that the unions did issue proceedings against Lendlease, the council's preferred bidder for the HDV, and it was reported in the construction press, and I quote, Lendlease have confirmed they have settled their cases. So in other words, Lendlease are blacklisters, and if they don't break the law, they certainly breach building workers' human rights, and that's the right to be active in your union. So in the absence of many other sanctions, it is the view of Unite that blacklisters should not be rewarded with public contracts, particularly by Labour councils. Thank you very much.
Right, questions, Councillor Ibrahim.
So, thank you for your deputation, Adrian. So, I've heard it. Well, there's an argument to say that Lendlease have been unfortunate in this episode, that they actually weren't the. Bear with me here. They actually weren't allegedly the blacklister. That in fact it was an organisation. I've got it here called Bovis. Could I hear some comments about that? Because I know that that's been kind of the information that we've received. So I'd be really interested to hear your perspective on that.
Well, it's absolutely true, of course, that Lendlease did acquire Bovis. But in any takeover, the acquiring firm not only gets the assets of the firm that it's taken over, but it also has to inherit the liabilities. And, of course, such a takeover would be subject to due diligence. Lendlease must have known what it was taking on. It would have known in advance it was taking on Bovis's blacklisting liabilities, and they were presumably happy to do so. But a closer examination of the files on the blacklisting cases shows that there was a blacklisting action taken by an employer which the union did issue proceedings on behalf of its member. Let's tonight call it Mr. X for want of a better name. But the building site was the Blue Water Shopping Centre in Kent, and the employer was Lendlease. It was not Bovis, it was Lendlease. So, you know, blacklisting is something you can only do once. Once you've done it, you can't go back and say we're not blacklisters. As soon as you've blacklisted the first person, you are a blacklisting company. And blacklisting was and is widespread. Blacklisting is not just was, but is widespread across the construction industry. Unite has persuaded the Information Commissioner to open investigation into contemporary blacklisting, and for a Labour Council, Labour's policy is that it will hold, when in government, an open and transparent public inquiry into blacklisting, and given that this is a Labour Council, we don't feel that in advance of that inquiry, Labour councillors should reward blacklisters. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, it's just a point of clarification. So you're saying that with the Blue Water site, it was Lendlease, not Bovis. Is that what you just said?
So, Councillor Connor.
Another point of clarification on that. Can you, did I understand that's a current issue and that's currently being investigated, or are you saying that that was happened in the past?
That was one of the historical cases, yes.
How long ago?
Well, we issued proceedings in 2013, but it happened at some stage prior to that. Oh, sorry.
Any further questions from members? Okay, thank you for that. Thanks for coming, and it's good to have heard from you on those points. I'm going to ask the Cabinet member if he wants to respond briefly on any of those points.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the deputies for coming this evening. Just to quickly respond to those, so Nick, in terms of your points on leaseholders, I think there must have been some confusion because the idea for the development vehicle didn't emerge for the first time from the Future of Housing review. It was already being discussed in the Council. That had already been made clear, and I think it was mentioned in the report. So I think, as I said at Cabinet Chair, this was being looked at by the regeneration bit of the Council, and it was looked at from a housing point of view by the Future of Housing review as well. It's also important to say that the consultation that you mentioned specifically on the Future of Housing review was a consultation on tenancy management arrangements. It didn't look at these wider issues in terms of regeneration. But it's also important to say that the tenant consultations on the substantive questions of regeneration started in areas like Northumberland Park before the Future of Housing review had started. So they are quite different. And I understand that you have been in sort of legal dispute with Homes for Haringey, but I do think they're quite genuinely different, Chair, to what's before us this evening. Paul, in terms of your questions, so I don't really need to tell you that as a Labour Council we certainly do not take any lead from David Cameron and what his policies might have been. And obviously that's, if that wasn't abundantly clear already, the work on regeneration, consultation on regeneration, started years before David Cameron, it ever occurred to David Cameron he might want to say something about regeneration. And you're quite right that, bless him, he did think that a tiny amount of money might make some difference. That was obviously typical Tory nonsense and has got very little to do with what we're discussing this evening. We have worked very closely and continue to work very closely with Sadiq Khan on our major regeneration projects. The Mayor's providing a lot of funding for our various projects, and there is a draft estate regeneration good practice guide which the Mayor is working on. Now that's not finalised, but certainly talking that through recently with people at the GLA, it seems fairly clear that what's currently being proposed by the Council certainly is in accordance with all of the draft requirements that the Mayor has set out. In terms of the adopted policy, the policy, as we discussed at Cabinet, is a broad policy for the whole borough. It doesn't deal specifically with specific estates, so I don't think it's fair to say that we're in breach of that. And in terms of the legal challenge that's been launched, this was raised specifically at the Cabinet meeting, and the Council's chief lawyer made very clear that it didn't have an impact on the Cabinet's ability to make a decision. Adrian, and Dan, in terms of your points, I think the first thing I want to say very clearly is that I'm a proud union member and have been for some years. As a Labour councillor, of course, we would never ever condone blacklisting. It's an appalling.
If you keep shouting out, we'll be here a lot longer and we won't hear the answers or the information. We need to make a reasonable decision on these matters, so please don't shout out.
Thank you, Chair. So, of course, it's a practice that we think is completely abhorrent and that we completely condemn. This is something that has been discussed with Lendlease, of course, because it has been a concern for us. And, of course, we're worried not just about blacklisting as Labour Council, but, of course, the whole raft of good employment practices. In conversation with Lendlease, and they have a statement on their website that says this, I think as Councillor Ibrahim alluded to earlier, Lendlease have said that they did acquire Bovis, that, as Adrian said, Bovis had been involved in blacklisting. Lendlease have said publicly that they have settled all claims that were brought, that they condemn blacklisting, and also, having checked myself, the list of 40 blacklisting companies that was released by the Information Commission's office some years ago, Lendlease are not on that list. There's no evidence that Lendlease were a member of the consulting association. Now, were any evidence to emerge that, as Adrian said, there are historic claims that have been settled, but were any evidence to emerge that there was any ongoing practice of this kind, of course, we would take that very seriously indeed, and of course would ask anybody to bring that evidence to our attention, not only for this contract, but any other contract the Council might enter into. I think it's also important to stress, Chair, that Lendlease have got a good record of working with the public sector. They've worked on on school and hospital projects around the country. They built BBC Broadcasting House. They built the BBC Scotland headquarters. They're doing a contract in Parliament at the moment. So this is a company that's been through rigorous public sector procurement tests on multiple occasions. But as I say, blacklisting is absolutely something we strongly condemn, and we have been reassured this is a historic issue for Lendlease. We're reassured they have settled all claims and they have publicly apologised for the involvement of the company that they acquired. But as I say, if were there any fresh evidence, of course, I would ask the unions to bring that urgently to our attention.
Thank you. No, I've said if you keep shouting out, I will have to ask that you're removed. So don't keep shouting out. We'll be here for hours and we won't get through the business, which is important business for the people of this borough. Thanks. We're running behind time. I won't take any clarification at this stage, if you don't mind. I'd like to thank you for coming. It's important. It's important if the points have been made and responded. Can I ask Councillor Hare to introduce his call-in, please?
Good evening, Chair. Thank you. I'm speaking in favour of the Liberal Democrat call-in, which is call-in 1, which asks this committee to refer this matter to full council. You want to come up? Go. I'll ask this committee to refer this matter to full council with the recommendation that Lendlease is not chosen as the preferred bidder and that the Haringey Development Vehicle, also known as the HDV, does not proceed. The points I'm going to raise are as follows, and I'll do them in detail in a moment, but the points are Lendlease itself, the experience of Lendlease from elsewhere, the deal with Lendlease, the failure to consult, the lack of openness, the exclusivity clause, the risks, and Scrutiny's options. So going to the first of those, Lendlease. The Liberal Democrats have grave concerns about the proposed HDV arrangements and the choice of preferred bidder. In our view, the process of choosing a preferred bidder and creating the HDV company should not proceed. Lendlease has a checkered history. In the office's report, they have acknowledged that Bovis Lendlease engaged in blacklisting of union workers. They have acknowledged that a subsidiary company of Lendlease was fined $56 million for overbilling public authorities for construction work in the United States. The third thing, experience of Lendlease from elsewhere. I'm afraid I do not agree with the officer's assessment that the very small number of social rented homes delivered by Lendlease on the Haygate estate in Southwark, in their words, has no bearing on this issue. It is clear that many parts of the HDV plans are not yet firm and will be subject to negotiation. I think we should consider this extract from the New Statesman. And what follows is this extended quote. On the Elephant, a 37-storey building with 284 residential units at the glamorous Elephant and Castle roundabout was granted planning permission in November 2012 and is currently under construction. The London Borough of Southwark has internal targets which require all new developments in Elephant and Castle to include a minimum of 35% affordable housing. But in council planning meetings, developers Lendlease argued that they would be unable to support the inclusion of affordable housing within the development. A second core would be required to provide separate access, including lifts and circulation areas, to socially rented accommodation within the development. This is their argument for not providing any. And the cost of construction would increase with the introduction of a further lift, as well as separate access and servicing arrangements. In other words, New Statesman article, this is it, I'm still reading, would cost too much to segregate the two types of tenant. And in case you were wondering, they had to have separate entrances because not doing so would have significant implications on the values of the private residential properties. So, this is the last sentence of the New Statesman article. Instead of devoting 35% of the development, around 100 units, to affordable housing, the firm instead contributed £3.5 million to the construction of a community leisure centre next door. And the total cost of that is going to be around 20 million. So, and what I am continuing what I'm saying, is this the right organisation to deliver the biggest project this council is ever likely to undertake? The project that it is hoped will deliver lots of so-called affordable housing? I think not. Council housing provides homes for some of the more vulnerable members of our community. When their estate is redeveloped, they will be forced to move, interrupting continuity of care, for example, social contacts and support networks. For families, moving away may well disrupt children's education and friendships. For leaseholders, as well as the disruptions just described, forced purchase is highly unlikely to be at a price that will allow them to return to a new dwelling because it will not be affordable, nor will comparable housing be available in the borough. Effectively, many will be priced out of the borough, and it is very hard to imagine a contract with small print that makes all of that happen and all of the things this council expects to happen actually happen. So I'm moving on now to the deal with Lendlease. From the little we can gather, which is in the public domain, we are concerned that the commitment to affordable and social housing is weak. We are also concerned that the Cabinet report only aims to protect current tenants and leaseholders. There is no word about the future tenants and leaseholders. Guarantees given in media interviews, of which there have been many, mean nothing if there are not cast iron guarantees in the small print of the contract. And in the end, this council will be in bed with a driven, profit-oriented, multinational company that is answerable to its shareholders, not to the people of Haringey. I'm moving on to failure to consult. We are concerned that council tenants, leaseholders, local businesses and residents in general have not been consulted on the proposal to form the HDV and the consequences it will have for these groups. Lack of openness. Why is the Cabinet report, which has been seen by members of this committee but not by other councillors and not by me, why is it exempt? Why could any figures in it not be redacted? There is no point in my accepting an offer to view the report confidentially because I will not be able to quote from it or use it in any way. Reports have to be open. The exclusivity clause. We are concerned that the construction exclusivity clause will see a percentage of contracts going to Lendlease's construction arm may not represent the best value for money. Linked to this, there are several instances in the Cabinet report where it is suggested Lendlease may charge for their expertise and management and so on. We understood that one of the reasons for the HDV was to bring in expertise without the council having to pay for it. It seems now that that is not the case. Risks. We believe that overall the risk of selecting this bidder and proceeding with an HDV into which the council has put all of its properties, its commercial leases and properties and tenancies outweigh any benefits suggested by the Cabinet. Scrutiny's options. As you know, the Housing and Regeneration Scrutiny recommended that the HDV should not proceed, and indeed recommended that full council should have the final say, with a vote on whether to set up the HDV or not. That recommendation, made previously, was rejected by the Cabinet, along with many other recommendations made by Scrutiny. The Liberal Democrats are concerned that if Scrutiny follows the action proposed in the second call-in from the Labour backbenchers, which you are about to hear, that is, to send this matter back to Cabinet and ask them to reconsider, it is highly unlikely that the Cabinet will change their minds. In fact, I have not been able to find a single example of a call-in referred back to Cabinet that resulted in Cabinet reversing its original decision. We argue that the only way to send a strong signal to the Cabinet that these proposals do not have the support of councillors outside the Cabinet is for there to be a vote at full council on the 20th of March. As well as meeting the first standard of democracy, giving all councillors a say on the issue, a vote against the HDV and the selection of the preferred bidder at full council would be very difficult for Cabinet to ignore. Frankly, we should be honest that if this Scrutiny Committee sends this matter back to Cabinet, then the Cabinet will do as they have done before, which is to ignore it, perhaps with a few sops thrown in our direction with some minor amendments. That isn't good enough, and I think it must be referred back to full council. Thank you.
Thanks. Questions from members? Got Councillor Ibrahim.
Councillor Hare, I just wanted to be clear that you understood the role of this committee. So, for example, you've asked that, and I'm obviously not making any kind of prejudgment on that, that it be sent to full council so that other councillors can vote on it. Now, a decision to send this to full council doesn't mean that the full council votes on the preferred bidder. It votes on the call-in of whether to send it back. So it can't... Are you clear about that? Simply because, obviously, we know you're saying to the other council... No, I'm not saying what I want to do. I just want to be clear about whether you understand, because in your last statement, you said about other councillors getting a vote. What you will get a vote on is the same as what your member on this panel will get, is whether to send it back. It can't decide... Full council can't decide to appoint or not appoint a preferred bidder. Only Cabinet can do that.
I was just going to...
It's important we hear the answers from the call-ins. Now, if you get... don't shout out. We need to hear what the members who brought the call in have to say. Was Councillor Engert or Councillor Hare going to come?
Could I ask Councillor Engert?
Yeah, I was going to reply. I think the important thing is that every member of this council has a point to express an opinion on this. And if it goes to full council, there will be a discussion on which we can hear the views of the councillors on behalf of their residents. Councillors actually represent residents, not themselves.
No one's... Councillor Ibrahim.
Sorry, Councillor Engert, you're on the Housing and Regeneration Scrutiny panel, aren't you? So you've obviously you've been able to express your view. You've been part of making the recommendations, as has Councillor Newton, and you've voted on the recommendations. So do you not feel that you've had a say in terms of the recommendations on the scrutiny panel quite publicly, actually?
I've certainly had an ability to have a say, and one of the recommendations was it should go to full council. We spent an awful lot of time, and I think this scrutiny committee should be proud of the work that the Housing and Regen Scrutiny panel did to uncover the issues to do with the HGV. So certainly, but I want to hear the opinion of all councillors, because we're collectively responsible for our residents.
All right, any further questions at this stage from members to Councillor Hare? Councillor Connor.
Yeah, I was going to ask a sort of wider question. So when you were talking about your concerns with Lendlease, do you think these concerns are grave enough to warrant at this point Lendlease not being a preferred bidder? Was that what you were trying?
I mean, it is quite difficult to separate the issue of the choice of Lendlease from the whole principle of the HDV. I think that the concerns that we've heard from the deputations, and we may well hear more from the second call-in, are really quite significant, and they reflect a company which is multinational. If you look at its website, it's very proud of the billions of pounds of investment it has in numerous countries. And by comparison with them, this council is a minnow. We may start out, we've spent and set aside something like £1.6 million for legal advice, other advice, support, to get to the stage where we will have set up a HDV. But that amount of money at the start is only the start of a very long 20, 25 or whatever year life of a development vehicle. And the life of that vehicle is going to be under the same pressure. The council side of the so-called 50-50 contract is going to be under the same enormous pressure from a very commercially driven company. And I think the company which has got this track record of bad faith in terms of its partner in the United States, of bad faith pushing the economic figures for, as I described, with Southwark, the Lendlease is so driven, and we're going to be on the receiving end of that sort of treatment. It isn't just possible to my mind, it is inevitable. And this council, as other councils, is not well equipped for that sort of commercial hard reality. And we've failed on other things. The estate agency ended up with 3 clients and I think 1 property let after 6 months and £500,000 expended. We are minnows and babies at this, and council officers who do try to do a good job, honestly, to deliver what they've been asked to deliver by the politicians. Nevertheless, as we run this vehicle over 2 decades or more, we're going to be on the receiving end, I think, of very powerful, experienced, driven developer. And I would rather it was not going to happen like that. There are alternatives. It's not the time to discuss them, but that's my belief.
Councillor Gunness.
Thank you, Councillor, here for your presentation. I just wanted to ask you, what are in your opinion, what are the similarities between Haringey Estate and HDV? Can you explain that to us, please? Thank you.
I think the frightening thing is that that statement about separating people out. I know that actually in Haringey, the preferred option when you do any development is to pepper pot. I mean, that's always been our desire, not to separate people into different buildings. So people that rent live in a different building with a different service than people that have bought. And I think we're trying to build communities, not ghettos, in the middle of our estates.
Thanks. Any further questions from members? We'll be exploring these issues in some more detail in due course. So thank you for the call-in presentation. Can I ask Councillor McNamara to present the second call-in, and then we'll be looking for some response from this side of the table.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Can I just ask as a point of clarification, just for housekeeping, whether or not, if the Q&A section, if there's any points that I think Councillor Brabazon and Councillor Tucker might better answer, that I can refer them to them? I just wanted to check that first of all. Chair, can I thank members of the Overview and Scrutiny panel. Without making light of it, it does seem slightly familiar, having been here at Overview and Scrutiny not so long ago, arguing the very same point, that Cabinet ought to pause the process relating to the HDV whilst further essential work is undertaken to scrutinise the details of the scheme itself. I would refer in the main Overview and Scrutiny pack to the details of calling 2, to the second paragraph, where 4 significant grounds are outlined as the rationale for the calling. And starting off, if that's okay, Chair, the potential breach of the Council's public sector equality duty. So mindful of the fact that this calling is specifically about the decision minute 184 of Cabinet of February 14th with regards to the approval of the preferred bidder, in terms of the potential breach of the Council's public sector equality duty, I'd refer in the response pack from officers to page 10. On page 10, the Council has outlined, and I would challenge the assertion in this, that the Cabinet decision of 14th of February does not require an EQIA. I would refer to page 8 of the original pack, where it's outlined there that in terms of the public sector equality duty, advice from the Equality and Human Rights Commission is that if an equality impact is known, and moreover if it's known who it will impact, that work should be undertaken before a decision is made. And it is my understanding, and I'm not a lawyer, that there is case law to support that. And I'm simply quoting the Equality and Human Rights Commission in that regard. Okay. I'd also refer with interest something that I wasn't aware of with regards to comments from the First Deputy, who I believe made reference to a judicial review hearing. And in conjunction, I presume, with the Gordon Peters letter before action that I asked a question about at Cabinet itself, I'm not sure that this bodes well for the Council's direction of travel if this ends up being a matter that gets argued in the High Court, which I think would be deeply regrettable for the Council. With regards to the second point in the calling, with regards to the potential legal risks of the decision being challenged, which I've just intimated there, in the response pack, again on page 13, I'd make the point that officers' advice that nothing in the letter before action would stop the Council taking any action at this point in terms of enacting minute 184. I do believe that, in my view, this is a technical argument around the legal right of the Council to proceed until and unless a legal impediment or judgment states that it can't. I don't believe that that's the same as the rapid and emerging situation whereby the risk of legal challenge outlined in the Housing and Regeneration Scrutiny Panel report is coming to pass, and it seems quite rapidly, and further appears to possibly vindicate the caution advised by Overview and Scrutiny and the regretful situation that this may end up being argued by claimants in the High Court, and the attendant reputational harm the Cabinet decision and direction of travel risk bringing on Haringey Council, which seems to refute one of the original rationales that it would be a reputational harm not to proceed. I'd refer then to the third point on the construction exclusivity clause. In the response pack from officers, with regards to this, 5.7, I believe that is. 5.7. It refers to an exclusivity clause not being unusual. I mean, I would make the point that not being unusual is not the same as being preferable or best practice or even value for money. And value for money was a point raised in Call-in 1. I'd also refer to Section 123 of the Local Government Act of 1972. Again, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not an expert, but it does raise the question over the issue of best consideration, which applies to responsibilities placed upon councils and councillors in matters relating to the sale or transfer of publicly owned council land or assets. So I'm not sure what that actually lends itself to in terms of the strength of argument to proceed now with the appointment of a bidder. Going back to the grounds again, number 4, the legal question of whether varying the terms of the partnership. 6.18 of the response doesn't really seem to answer much in terms of just saying that this is quite normal. But in the actual pack itself, on page 9, under Regulation 30 of the Public Contracts Regulations 2015, any further negotiations between the Council and the preferred bidder must not have the effect of materially modifying the essential aspects of the procurement. I'm quite concerned at this juncture that if any of the unsuccessful applicants were to legally challenge the appointment of the successful applicant on the basis that the terms that they were to proceed on were materially different and they were to argue that they were willing to argue that, I see that in the same germane strain that this could end up in the High Court on the basis of equalities, impact and consultation, I worry that there is further legal risk. And again, I'd refer back to the point that in the rationale it was argued that there was a legal as well as reputational risk of not proceeding, when it's possible that the reverse might be true. In terms of just some further points, I'm mindful of the time and I believe I've got about 3 minutes left. There does seem to be a major question here over the ability of Cabinet to deliver on the assurances outlined by the Leader of the Council recently, when there may be a legal requirement, as mentioned before, if significant variations to the details of affordable housing and tenancies are made, that this might only be possible by reopening the procurement process that led to the successful applicant being chosen over the unsuccessful applicant. Consultation and emphasis does seem to have focused very much on the non-specific generalities in regards to do people want new homes, development, which it strikes me, having seen and read through some of those responses, it doesn't deal with the issue that there are residents and traders who are aware that within the first phase of the proposed HDV, it relates to blocks in which they either trade or live in, and that they may all be aware of what the impact is, but yet we still haven't carried out that essential initial further consultation and equalities work. I'm also conscious that there seems to be a bit of a conflict between, on the one hand, the debate taking shape over not just the concept of the HTV, but more specifically the detail of it, and on the other hand, the impact on and the implications for the residents and traders this will have, as regardless of what anyone may think about the HTV, and I'm not ideologically for or against it. It is the impact on the residents and traders and the implications for their future that is paramount, and they appear to be, sadly, ever more crowded out of the debate. We've heard recently the views of the Mayor of London and Shelter, when actually I certainly, as a member of the panel that authored the report, am more interested in what the traders and the residents in places like Northumberland Park and Wood Green feel. I would then just very quickly just move on to the point that I don't think anybody really with any serious consideration of this issue would doubt the ambition of this proposal. And in the context of understandable frustration over the impact of austerity cuts and the need to do something and not just stand there when something has to be done, we need to build new houses, waiting lists need to be reduced, and all of the other attendant issues relating to temporary accommodation, what have you. But in amongst all of that ambition, it does strike me that there is a major concern. And the concern is that what if, in amongst all of that ambition, it turned out that what we intended to happen didn't, and those ambitions weren't met, the number of social housing units fell, rents rose, numbers in temporary accommodation went up, or the HDV company failed, or the developer sold on their share, or any number of things didn't pan out as we've been told time and again will definitely happen. We can't simply rely on assurances, promises, commitments, or any other references to the Council doing its utmost when we need concrete facts and concrete contingency plans and risk assessments. And what I would refer to in terms of all the points I would raise there, just as a final point, referring back to page 10 of the actual pack itself and calling 2 in terms of what we're asking for, that is to refer the appointment of the preferred bidder back to Cabinet, with a view to the decision being delayed in order that further, and I would say essential, scrutiny work can take place in relation to the significant risks as outlined and as seems to very, very unfortunately be emerging in the courts as we speak, including concerns regarding the preferred bidder for the HTV having exclusivity rights, unresolved issues regarding financial and legal risk, consultations and EQIAs, the Council potentially being in breach of the public sector equality duty, and questions over how assurances made over housing and tenancy officer stakeholders can be achieved or enforced without having to return to the formal procurement process and in a way that is legally enforceable. Thank you.
Thanks, and nicely to time as well, so grateful for that. Questions from members initially. Obviously, a lot of the points you make will be taken up with people on this side of the room. We've got Councillor Connor and then Councillor Ibrahim.
Hi, thank you for that deputation. That did highlight a huge amount of risk, as you've highlighted. I'm just interested in what you actually want us potentially to do with that information. And I think the outcome you wanted was it to go back to Cabinet. I think a question that I would ask what would your expectation be that Cabinet could do at that point?
Listen. Let me be very clear about something. I don't feel comfortable being here. I don't revel in the idea of being the principal signatory of a call-in, something that I've never had anything to do with in the nearly 7 years I've been on the Council. I was in the Cabinet myself up until last year. I'm also conscious of the fact that as busy as I was in the environment portfolio at the time, I was aware that there was this proposal on the table, but I had no idea of the detail of it and the implications of it, let alone the size and scale. Where I have to have been aware of it, I would have not supported it at the time that I was in the Cabinet. And I think the point here is that this goes beyond party lines. This is about trying to appeal to Cabinet to actually see what potentially may be unfolding in terms of something that I just think that the opposition to this is just going to grow. Not grow because I think it should, but grow because there are people who are directly or indirectly affected by this who are only just coming to the realisation of what the impacts may be, whilst at the same time the size and scale and the lack of sufficient work to explain how the manifold risks could in any way be mitigated doesn't stack up. And for me, although this pertains to Minute 184, which is only the appointment of the preferred bidder, I'm at a loss to know what the urgency is with that, when with the excellent work that the scrutiny panel undertook, as endorsed by the ONS panel overall, I don't see why we shouldn't be given a green light to proceed further with the work that we did, and for Cabinet to return to this perhaps later on in the year when we've done that work and not before. And lastly, I would say, to go back to your original question, which is that I would ask that overview and scrutiny refer this back to Cabinet, and actually the onus is on Cabinet to listen to what's been said today and on previous occasions, and I probably doubt that this is not the end of it, and I very much hope that common sense will prevail and they'll pause.
I've got a few more questions afterwards, but I just wanted to because I really want to understand, because obviously there's a difference between what the first call-in has asked us to do, whereas much of the information is similar, much of the concerns are similar, but you're asking us to do something different. I mean, obviously you've explained a bit about why you want it to go back to Cabinet, but maybe if a couple of you could tell us what you think the difference is between it going to full council and back to Cabinet.
Look, I have no disagreement whatsoever with call-in one. It doesn't matter who did the call-in, whether it's Labour or Liberal Democrat. The point is that there's 57 councillors, 5 people signed call-in 1, 10 people signed call-in 2. Call-in 1 asked for it to go back to, well, to be varied in terms of its destination and go to full council, whereas call-in 2 asked it to go to Cabinet. I strongly believe it should go back to Cabinet because it's Cabinet that makes the decision. They are the decision takers. Full council doesn't make decisions on this particular issue. As much as any of us may disagree with that, the constitution of the council is clear in that decisions of this type are made by the executive, so it needs to go back to the very same people. So in terms of who makes up that 57, well Councillor Hare's made his view clear tonight. I've made my view clear. I think so have other people here. So I don't need to be double counted by going to full council to be asked my view on that. I've made my view clear. It needs to go back to the 9 people that made the decision.
Yeah, I really want to, I think, obviously endorse what Councillor McNamara has said. In our regeneration and scrutiny report, we said that the final decision around the Haringey Development Vehicle should go to full council because of the size, scale, unprecedented nature of this and the risks that are associated with it. And I would hope that if it, well, I would hope it doesn't even get there, but were it to get there, that each member of the council would actually search their conscience, their moral judgment, their political commitments to the residents of this borough, and think very seriously about what they were putting their hands up for, because this is a risky social experiment with other people, people who live on council estates, who will see their lives disrupted, and who haven't really, whatever is being said in the documents, have not been asked in terms, which I think is what lawyers say, in terms if they want their homes knocked down. And that is what this is about. So I agree, I think it should go back. The Cabinet have made it their issue. They now need to reconsider, and as Stuart said, they do need to listen, they do need to think. What I find most extraordinary is that there is a wealth of evidence. You've asked me why I think it should go back to the Cabinet. There is a wealth of evidence that we have tried to produce which relates to other authorities' experience, which from our research was not exactly sparkling. Tunbridge Wells lost $250,000. They paid £330,000 up front to companies to give them the advice that no doubt Haringey has received, but they ended up paying out $250,000 because they have had the decency to share their experience on their website. We don't know how much Croydon paid out. We do know that Croydon Council lost $144 million. We're told this is a different scheme. It isn't really different. It's the same structure, the 50-50 governance and all the rest of it. Where we're told that the council will have a control. We know, listening to people in the community, very interestingly, Councillor Ibrahim and I were at a meeting the other night, hearing from people who have experienced on these private boards who said to us, you will not be in control. They said they will be in control because these are big multinationals, as Councillor Hare has said. I don't know what it takes for the Cabinet to hear the knowledge, the experience from elsewhere, which we did our very best in the scrutiny report to uncover, the evidence from other authorities who were willing to share with us, and the actual evidence that some wouldn't share with us, which I think is as telling as the stuff that they did share, that people would not speak about this. The fact that in Southwark, I was very struck by Councillor Strickland's references to Lendlease's other great developments, like the BBC building, which I accept is beautiful in Langham Place, or BBC Scotland. But when you turn to the housing project, which you didn't mention, which is the Haygate, you look on the website of 35% in Southwark, that tells us there were, I think, 80 social homes in the end. So a very different story with Lendlease as the developer, a very different story. And so for these reasons, the Cabinet have made their bed. Now I think they should have to review what we've said and to take seriously and to really listen and rethink. It isn't too late to step back, and it is always good. I was always taught you should reflect. I was taught always to be a reflective practitioner, and that means you have to think about what you've done. It's always time, and it's not a bad thing to say, no, we will pause. And Councillor McNamara has said if he'd have understood more, he perhaps would have thought differently. And there's still time, because the risks that we are facing with this scheme dwarf all the muddle that went on with Ali Pali, all the other schemes that Councillor Hare has outlined, which have been Haringey's very recent experience. And I'll just plead with you to listen and rethink. And that's why I think it should go back to the Cabinet.
Okay, so Councillor Connell will just to clarify a point, and then Councillor Ibrahim.
It's just to do with sort of decision making, and I just want to clarify this point at the outset. Because you said that the scrutiny had sent it back to Cabinet to basically pause while scrutiny did some more scrutiny work, which we agreed with, and it went back to Cabinet. And obviously Cabinet didn't pause and didn't take up that recommendation at that point. So is it sort of right within the Constitution that actually if OSC sends it to full council can then make the decision rather than Cabinet? It isn't. So it doesn't come under that bit. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that because I think that's quite important. Because if that can't happen, then, okay, right, that's just interesting. Thank you.
So, Councillor Ibrahim.
That was more specific on what you wanted us to do, but I had some specific questions that you've raised in your call-in around exclusivity. Now, this is an area that I'm kind of finding out about at the moment as part of kind of looking into what we can do in terms of the future scrutiny work that we're going to do. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
First of all, say that the 4 points that I more explicitly referred to were obviously not exhaustive, because the further paperwork in calling 2 lists a much more extensive list of reasons, but simply that on page 5 of the pack and on page 1 of calling 2, they were the 4 most significant. With regards to exclusivity, where some of the other points relate to legal issues, that one that you refer to in terms of exclusivity, it fits more within what I think is the common thread between calling 1 and calling 2 over value for money, and the deliverability related to the whole original rationale for the HDV, which was to manage and successfully use the assets that the council has to make money and use the council's portion of that for public good. The question there remains if there are doubts over whether or not this vehicle will make money. And I certainly wasn't as aware as I would like to have been about the nature and extent of what an exclusivity clause meant and the fact that it applied to this process, and only found out a bit so late in the process. And I think, and just referring back to the officer's response, which simply, and I think not very helpfully, only refers to it being normal and doesn't address the issue of whether it's either value for money or not, or whether or not it's going to help or hinder this proposed vehicle to make the money that it needs to build social housing, which it's intended to do.
Right, Councillor Ibrahim, do you have a follow-up on that? Or? Oh, Councillor Tucker wants to come in.
I think the issue of this exclusivity agreement is key in 2 ways. First of all, it's new information. There were rumours that there might be something like this with the HDV. I and others dismissed them as scaremongering, but it is apparently the case. So I think it's a new reason, on top of the reasons raised in the previous call-in, for the matter to be referred back to Cabinet. The key problem is this. there is an assumption that there is some kind of an equality in the relationship between the council and Lendlease because it's 50-50, and we will share in the profits, and the profits, 50% of the profits, will be recycled back and benefit the residents of Haringey. The whole issue of the exclusivity agreement, I would suggest, completely undermines and debunks that entire concept. It creates a situation whereby the vehicle itself might make no profits whatsoever or even a loss, and therefore there would be nothing to be recycled back to Haringey Council. Haringey Council may even have to subsidise the HDV. However, the construction arm of Lendlease, by getting this secret amount of the building contracts, we're not even at this stage even allowed to know what that proportion is. By getting that secret amount, they will be able to feed their own profits to the tune of tens, hundreds of thousands, or even potentially millions by pushing the work to themselves. Then we're told there will be some means of ensuring value for money. Without wishing to criticise in any way the officers who presented their report contains no information or no concrete guarantees that would give us any reliability whatsoever that there will be genuine value for money attached to this. And we have experienced previously in public-private partnerships where we were told the private sector would deliver value for money when in fact we had absolute scandals where thousands of pounds were charged for putting in a light fitting. And so you may get a situation where Lendlease Corporation receive millions, tens or hundreds of millions out of the HDV, whereby the HDV itself provides no profit to be recycled by the council.
Thanks. Councillor Hearn.
Thank you for your contribution so far. It's been very interesting. The thing that's, I just want to ask you is actually about risk and what you think you need to see to be assured that risk has been fully examined. I particularly noticed that you drew to our attention the equality impact assessment that has been provided, which is brief, to say the least. And I'm just wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit more on what you would expect to see by way of risk assessment.
I think, thank you for your question. I think the first part, what would it require? It would require the Cabinet to pause, like we originally asked them, and then for work to be undertaken to fully consult very specifically on the details with those affected residents and traders, many of whom, like I referred to before, are indirectly aware of what the arguments may be for and against by reading it in the press, which is not going to help them in their predicament in terms of concern. And I think equality's impact about how to mitigate that, I think, is important. And lastly, with regards to the absolutely central issue, which, along with the exclusivity clause that Councillor Tucker referred to in more detail, is the overriding question of the legal enforceability of further promises and assurances that have been made over, let's say, for example, the last month or two. So, equalities impact assessments in detail, consultation in detail, an exploration of what these legal risks that we've heard either deputies or claimants referring to and that could end up being argued out in the court, and the reputational risk of that, and all of those factors leading up to the common sense argument that pause is what's needed to explore all of that.
Yeah, I think the whole thing here is about risk. But when we've talked about risk, let's start risk for who? There's no risk for the consultants. There's no risk for the lawyers. There's no risk, with all respect, there's no risk to Turnberry because they're a company that's been advising. There's no risk to external advisors because they get paid. Whatever happens, all these people get paid. And they get paid with our money. The risk, let's look at the risk to the tenants and the residents and the leaseholders. What risk assessment, what risk about people's homes? We've been told there is, Councillor McNamara sort of said it, but let me reiterate it since we are in public. We've been told if there's a commitment, a guarantee, we're aiming for housing, we are doing our utmost. All these are very different meanings. And what it really means, it seems to me, is that we really don't know. And we can't guarantee it. The housing strategy, which is the policy framework on which you have accepted our call-in, is the senior top strategy for housing. And we said in our call-in, we referred to the fact that the housing strategy is clear that it can't guarantee the number of social homes, whether they are social homes with Lendlease, which I don't think are really social homes, or social homes in the way we understand them as public sector homes. These cannot be guaranteed. And in reading the housing strategy, which I have, in preparation for this call-in, I have read the whole strategy. What struck me is how much of it, the running thread, is the HDV. And it talks about building homes for private rent. And many paragraphs are dedicated to that type of theme. So, so the risk in all of this is the risk to people who have secure tenancies, to the leaseholders. What will they get if they're moved? Where will people go? We know there are no homes for people to move into. The council's own paperwork says the number of voids is going down. The number of empty flats because of the nature of the pressure on council housing. And it isn't that we don't understand the pressure the council is under to provide homes. The issue is, what is the risk to the residents and tenants and businesses of this, of which, turning to the commercial portfolio, I did do a member inquiry to find out how many of the commercial businesses were on leases that had expired and who had licences. And there are, I can't remember the exact number, forgive me, but several hundred, few hundred of the commercial businesses in this portfolio already have leases which are due to expire, have expired, or on licences. What is their future when transferred to a private company? So that's another issue. And then let's turn to the financial risk. We heard at the Cabinet, we've quoted it in the call-in, and of course I can't find exactly where it is, where when asked about how much money Lendlease would be putting in, the preferred bidder, it suddenly became, well, they wouldn't be putting cash in, and they would be putting cash in possibly at a later date. And this whole issue about equity and who takes the risk. The council's taking the risk with its land, we're taking the risk with people's homes, and it's sad that the land only has value when people aren't living on it. I think you really need to reflect on that. And what this is about, that our public land where people live, that their homes have no value except when they are gone. So the risk is our land goes in, but no money is forthcoming until much later, at which point we might be able to get it. But as we now know about the subcontracts and the sub-companies, which I have to say were all presented to us in the scrutiny, so they're in plain sight. A lot of that money is going to disappear into the sub-companies, the property management companies, the service charges, all the rest of it. And so there are massive risks. And the overall risk, as Stuart said in the previous presentation to the first overview of scrutiny, is that the council could lose enormous amounts of money, and that will benefit nobody.
If there's no further questions, I was going to ask the Cabinet member to respond very briefly to the points made by the call-in. If you can make that brief. what I'll suggest, because we've been going for just over an hour and a half, that after the Cabinet member responds, we'll have a very brief 5-minute break. Otherwise, it gets a bit difficult to sort of press on through this. And then we'll come back and we'll have questions to the Cabinet member and officers arising from the call-in, from their response, and the other matters that have been raised this evening. So if we could do that, if I can ask Councillor Strickland to make any response initially he wants to make to the call-ins.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the two call-ins for their points and their questions. So just to pick up...
I will have to, if you carry on with that, I will have to clear the gallery, because it doesn't allow us to properly concentrate on what members are telling us so we can make a reasonable decision. So please don't do that. Let him have his say. We can hear what he says. We can all hear what he says, and then we'll make a reasonable decision at the end of this meeting. Please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just going through some of the major points. There were lots of questions around Southwark and the Haringey estate in particular. I think just a few points to make there are, firstly, that is a very different model. That's a traditional development agreement model where the council sold its land. And of course, once a council does that, it has no control whatsoever. One of the reasons for looking at a joint venture is it is quite different. It does give the council an ongoing say, and it does give the council ongoing control. And I think it is important to stress as well that, as members themselves made clear, it wasn't Lendlease that made the ultimate decisions about what that estate would look like and what the split of housing would be. It was the cross-party planning committee of Southwark Council. So I think we have to remember that Southwark Council said yes to all of those changes, and I think a lot of those questions have to be asked of Southwark. In terms of commitments, obviously commitments around affordable housing, so I won't go into this in detail because we did spend 2.5 hours at Cabinet going through many of these issues, and we did look at this in some detail. But the key point to stress, Chair, is simply that, of course, at this point in any procurement, there often isn't absolute detail nailed down, because the purpose of this period from the Cabinet decision until July is absolutely, as was made clear at Cabinet, as was made clear in the report for this evening, is to look at that detail, is to pin down the detail, is to thrash out the final questions about the exclusivity arrangements, about governance, about risk. Absolutely, that is the purpose. So I think it's not fair to say that the Cabinet has ignored the recommendation. There should be a delay, and because of course there is a delay, and the Cabinet report in November 2015 always made clear there will be a 5-month delay to look at exactly the issues that Scrutiny highlighted. On the issue of consultation, quite a few different questions around consultation. The only point I'd make there, Chair, is to say that remember that there is ongoing significant consultation on the substance of regeneration in Northumberland Park, in Broadwater Farm, and
we're not able to hear what's being said here with interruptions like that. If the people that are regularly shouting out do it again, I will have to ask for the officers to remove them, and I don't want to do that because I want everybody to have the opportunity to hear this. If all you're here to do is shout out, then you really haven't got much business here. You can go and watch it on the web. Right, that's one. Out, please. Right, we won't have the. No, right. Can you? We need to listen to them, and then we'll be asking questions. Now, either you be quiet, or I have to ask you to go. Otherwise, we can't do it. Yeah, absolutely. So, right, any more interruptions from people? I will have to ask you to go. I don't want to do that because these are meetings which should be. It's a meeting held in public, and that's. I've just said, I know what your points are. If you keep shouting out, we can't have a reasonable meeting. So, we'll let him finish, and if there are any more interruptions during this, I will have to ask the officers to ask those people to go. So let's let him say his bit. We'll have a 5-minute break, then we'll come back and we'll be asking more questions. So please, let's get this bit finished. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So, as I was saying, there is significant ongoing consultation on the substance of what regeneration would involve. So discussions in Wood Green and in Tottenham about what goes where, about new schools, about homes, about new parks, around the proportion of rented and other things. These are things that are being discussed with residents and will be discussed with residents in consultation. It's also important to say, and of course, Chair, all of these things are a matter of public record. The Council consulted in Northumberland Park on a Tottenham Area Action Plan, which clearly identified the Northumberland Park estate as one for significant regeneration, including some demolition. That was publicly consulted on and was agreed by the Council. It's currently with the Planning Inspector. There were references from Councillor Brabazon to the housing strategy, which, as she said, does mention this. That, again, was subject to repeated public consultation. And equally, the more detailed rehousing policy, which has been referenced as well, again, was subject to public consultation. So all of this has been repeatedly consulted on with the public. Nothing has been hidden. Multiple documents have been agreed transparently at public cabinet meetings following public consultation in accordance with the law. There were questions from the Liberal Democrats about exempt information, which is perfectly reasonable. You'll see from the packs, though, that we do try and keep it an absolute minimum. But it's important to say, Chair, of course, that decisions on exempt information are not made by politicians at all. They are made by lawyers in consultation with officers. So any question on that would be for the lawyer. It's not something I'm involved in at all. In terms of there were various questions around exclusivity and charging for Lendlease's services, which I'll just briefly touch on. We can come back to that in detail in the questions, Chair. But it is important to say that the Cabinet report made it very clear, and we had a long discussion about this at Cabinet, that the exclusivity arrangements have not been agreed. They're for the 5-month period. So I think it's not fair to say that things, if things haven't been agreed or vague at the moment, it's because they genuinely have not been agreed and wouldn't normally be agreed by this point. And the July report will have to make very clear statements around the value for money assessment and best consideration. So we have a public duty to look at that, and that will be expressed in the report. In terms of Lendlease and their expertise, having obviously read all of the reports and been involved in the reports, I'm not aware of any suggestion, any report, that Lendlease wouldn't charge for their services. And it is perfectly normal, Chair, that any developer doing development would charge for development. And in the normal way, it'll be the job of the Council and its advisers to make sure that any fees charged are reasonable, that the board looks at those properly and fully. And again, John can say more about that in the second half if members are interested in talking about that. In terms of the businesses, I think it's really important to be clear, Chair, that the Council as it stands, the Council's property departments, I know this because I used to have property in my Cabinet portfolio, the Council charges market rents to its tenants in the commercial portfolio. Those market rents are based on assessments by independent private sector market advisors. So already those businesses are subject to full market rents independently assessed. That's exactly the process that will be followed by the company. So I think it's not fair to suggest that the Council is not in the property team, is not running a charity, is not giving away free property. It has a hard-nosed commercial approach. In terms of the Equalities Impact Assessment questions, an Equalities Impact Assessment was attached to the November paper, but also the November paper made it very clear that the next Equalities Impact Assessment would come with the July paper, because the decision that's being scrutinised tonight is simply to say, we ran a procurement process and this was the outcome. It doesn't make a substantive decision about setting up the company or any particular plans, and of course it's those substantive decisions that, of course, need to be subject to full and careful Equalities Impact Assessments, but also the November 2015 report made clear, Chair, that each site that comes forward to Cabinet, as has been discussed at length in previous meetings, which will happen over the 15-year period, of course, every site proposal will have to come with its own Equalities Impact Assessments. There will be significant and multiple Equalities Impact Assessments. And in terms of the legal questions that were raised around the current challenge and whether one needs to be done now. We have had clear QC advice, and it was on that basis that the Chief Lawyer of the Council gave his very clear view at the previous Cabinet meeting. We'll come back, I think, we'll get the lawyer to answer questions after the break, Chair, on the material modifications in procurement. Just to say quickly, there was a question on selling on shares. As was discussed at Cabinet, the partner cannot sell on its share of the company without explicit permission from the council. So suggestions that the partner can do whatever it wants is absolutely not the case, and that was made very clear in the original Cabinet decision. And all I'd say finally was there were questions around urgency. This process had been very far from rushed. And has not proceeded, with a sense of rapid urgency. It first went to Cabinet in early 2015. This has been going on for some time. The final decision still hasn't been made by the Council's Cabinet. There's been a long and robust process following the EU regulations. Has been to Cabinet 3 times. And as I said, most of the consultation on the substance of regeneration is subject to completely separate consultations, some of which have been going on for many, many years, well before we started this process, Chair. So regeneration, one of the criticisms residents always have of regeneration is that it's actually a very slow process, which is very true. And I'll just finish by saying there were Councillor Brabazon asked about why we hadn't reflected on this. What I would say is, in this long process, there has been significant reflection. The Future of Housing Review, which is part of the thinking on this, did involve a cross-party group of members travelling around the country, speaking to different councils, looking at different options. And the advisers around this table have worked for many other councils and have equally brought significant expertise to this. So it's absolutely not fair to say there hasn't been significant reflection. It's not fair to suggest there hasn't been significant soul-searching about what the best option is. And this is genuinely the option that we came to after a lot of serious thinking and a lot of serious consideration of the alternatives.
Okay, we'll Thank you. Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break here. So far. Okay, we're going to take questions from members of the committee to the Cabinet member. Obviously, any other officers or advisers present may want to respond. Do we want to go with Councillor Connor first? Yeah.
Okay, only because I'm starting at the beginning of the officers' report, and I think 5.1, 5.2 and 5.3, it's really about Lendlease as a company and its and how it's viewed. And I mean, we've heard quite a lot from Councillor Strickland about the rebuttal, but with actually in the papers that we were given, especially on the blacklisting, I mean, we were actually sent to the actual Lendlease own webpage, which I looked at, and at the bottom of the page there's a paragraph which explains a little bit more about what that was all about who this was, the part of the Bovis group of companies, etc., etc. But I don't think as councillors that's enough for us to be reassured that this company behaved appropriately, just to be given Lendlease's own webpage to look at and their own explanation of what happened. And I think as councillors, and especially on the scrutiny panel, we are here to sort of scrutinise the information that we're given. So really the question is about the 3 points, about the, I admit there was a different development vehicle, whatever it was called in the Haringey estate, but I think it is just about how that company behaved and whether we as councillors are comfortable and confident that they are the right people to go into that 50-50 partnership with. So I'd like a little bit more information, if possible, on 5.2 about the blacklisting, if there is any more information. A little bit more on 5.3 about the matter has no bearing on the current evaluation, about the it says historic practices of the fines that had been given, but actually that was dismissed in May 2014, so it's not that long ago, it's only 3 years. And a bit about how the social housing aspects in the Haringey estate, how they actually ended up with so few social housing houses at the end, because obviously Lendlease would have been a large part of that decision. So if you could just give us a little bit more information, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. If I get, so we talked about this at Cabinet, and I think Dan is best placed to answer. So I think it'd be good to talk about the due diligence that's been done so far, but also looking forward, Chair, in terms of what would be agreed on employment practices. I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, so kind of looking back first, at the very first stage of the procurement process, and I think the first questionnaire that all bidders had to fill in was part of your pack. It's the pre-qualification questionnaire that was an appendix to the Cabinet paper on the 14th. There was a series of questions about which required bidders to disclose convictions and other violations that might disqualify them in accordance with the procurement regulations. Obviously, we require all bidders to disclose everything that might come under that, and if it later were to transpire that any bidder had not disclosed something they should have done, obviously that would have very serious consequences for their future participation in the process. But none of the bidders disclosed to us anything which would have qualified them for disqualification under the procurement regulations. So that process was very carefully gone through at the very start, at the very first stage where we screened all of the potential bidders down to the long list of 6, which is what happened at that point. Looking forwards, one of the critical legal agreements that we will be bringing back to Cabinet in the summer will be the procurement policy that the development vehicle itself would use to procure construction and other services itself. Now, that will include, and this has already been accepted by all the bidders, specific requirements on sustainable procurement, including recognition of workers' rights and so on. So I have no, and that will be, those agreements will be kind of available for Cabinet to scrutinise in advance, obviously, of that decision being made. So not only are we comfortable that that can be dealt with, but we're also comfortable that all the bidders have accepted those requirements as part of the documentation which we're in discussion with them over.
Okay, I'm just going to follow up then. So I understand as part of that procurement process that Lendlease then didn't say that they had any convictions as part of that. Is that what, I think that's what you've just said. No, what did you just say?
They were required to disclose any that they'd had and as it were, explain the circumstances under which they'd been dealt with. Now, I haven't got the Lendlease response in front of me, and we can refer to the detail of what the questionnaire said. We've all got it in our packs. But the crucial point is that nothing that was disclosed in the Lendlease bid, or for that matter any of the other bids, would have disqualified them from the process in accordance with the procurement regulations.
So, yeah.
Sorry, I just want to clarify that. So obviously there are specific questions in the pre-qualification questionnaire. So are you saying that nothing was disclosed that would disqualify them? However, were there things that were disclosed that would not disqualify them?
Disclosure is obviously about what people, what the bidders volunteer. What checks and balances did you use to actually verify what they disclose? Because we can say what we like and whatever, but it could be that it's not true.
So the questions that are required, so I don't know if you've got the appendix in front of you, that there are in section 2 of the pre-qualification questionnaire, there's a series of mandatory questions you have to ask under the Crown Commercial Services regulations, I think they are. Now those are kind of standard public procurement questions, and I think I'm right in saying, what I don't have in front of me is the disclosures that all the bidders made. So I'm not going to. It would be wrong of me to speculate about what everyone had submitted. But the critical point to make is that none of the bidders disclosed anything as a part of this process that would have given cause to us to even consider disqualifying them under the regulations.
Is that only on the mandatory ones? Because there is a section 3 which is grounds for discretionary exclusion.
There's 2 on that too. Otherwise they wouldn't have got this far. So absolutely none of them disclosed anything that would have had them disqualified.
So,
Councillor Hearn made a point.
Yeah, Councillor Hearn, did you want to come back or a separate point? Yeah, that was right. Yeah, right. So, Councillor Ibrahim.
So I've got some questions about some of the things that in your response, Alan. So when we were talking about kind of being paid for services, so obviously, like you're quite right to say developer, you know, that's their business, they develop, they construct, etc. And you pay them to do that, they don't do it for free. But my question here is, when it's a partnership, therefore, what type of relationship is that? Is it a transactional relationship or is it a partnership? Because then the terms are very, very different. Are you in it together, or are you in it in a way whereby, yeah, you're a partnership, but anything they provide, you pay for? For me, that's a transactional relationship.
If I get John to respond, who's our independent procurement advisor.
All development activity, whether it's building a hospital, a library, a school, an office, a house, will require a level of services provided in terms of development management, because it's a complex process and somebody has to be paid to manage that process, to be the ringmaster of actually making sure everything happens on time, on budget, etc. So it's a reasonable and accepted industry cost. What we've sought to procure from the market as part of the vehicle is someone who's going to put risk money in alongside the council, and they are absolutely committed to put that money in when you sign the financial deal, but you're also wanting their services as a developer to make sure that they get the best deal done for the vehicle. And don't forget here, this is to protect your interests just as much as it is to protect their interests. In terms of, is it reasonable that they get paid for that? Yes, it is reasonable. There will be an actual specific agreement, a legal agreement, known as a development management agreement. It will be a legal contractual document that Lendlease will enter into between the vehicle and Lendlease in terms of their capacity as providing those development management services. So the vehicle will absolutely hold Lendlease to account to do those services properly, fairly, and in accordance with the terms of those services that they then seek to get paid for. The detail, the terms of payment for all of that, is all part of the negotiation that, or the bid that has been received to date, and the negotiation process that we will go through now.
My follow-up to that would be, but when they're in a 50-50 partnership, they are the development vehicle, therefore the transaction is with themselves. So it's almost like, will they be holding themselves accountable because they're half of that relationship? So doesn't that have a bit of a conflict?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I think Scott, who's one of our external lawyers, wants to come in on this.
The answer is yes, there is a conflict there. So what the legal agreements do, and this has been agreed, is they disenfranchise Lendlease out of voting in relation to circumstances where there's a dispute between the HDV and them as development manager. The council would control the votes, all of the votes in those circumstances.
Right. Further questions from members? Yeah. Okay, so I'll take Councillor Hearn first.
Just going back to the equality impact assessments, just want to be a little bit more clear about that. I'm just sorry, just talking because I'm flicking back to my notes. Okay. So, as I understand, sites have been named, so where are the equality impact assessments? And I'm having a struggle, by the way, understanding how an equality impact assessment that doesn't actually kind of like go fairly deeply into the main kind of issues that you've been looking at in the initial decision and give some kind of clear some clear guidance couldn't be done there. The equality impact assessment that has been offered to us has lots of doesn't apply or doesn't matter or it's all fine kind of stuff and doesn't seem to have gone deep enough. So, but given that, it does say there and it does say elsewhere in the reports that when sites are decided upon, then they will do them. Sites have been decided upon. When will equality impact assessments be made?
So, the Council has made a decision to name a number of sites for the purposes of the procurement process. The decision has most definitely not been made to transfer those sites to the HDV. That decision comes for the first phase of sites in the summer alongside the decision to set up the HDV itself. And so it's at that point, once we know a bit more than we do now about what the proposals are for those sites, that we can actually make an equality impact assessment of those proposals and present it alongside the proposal for their inclusion. The equalities impact assessment, which was part of the Cabinet Pack, which referred to the decision that Cabinet made in November 2015, was about the equalities impact of setting up the HDV itself, the act of doing that rather than specific sites. The large majority of the equalities impact of the work of the HDV will be in the work that the HDV does on the sites. So the impact assessments attach more to the decisions about the specific sites than to the setting up of the HDV itself. Although equalities impact assessments on all of those matters, the setting up of the company and on all of the individual sites, will be presented when those decisions are actually made, which is in the summer.
Yeah, I'll just clarify. You know, Councillor Hearn come back on that one.
Thank you for that. So as I understand it, we make a decision and then we do an equality impact assessment. Is that right?
No. So what will happen over the course of the period that starts now is that as the proposals for each of the site business plans emerge from the discussions with the preferred bidder, alongside that, an equalities impact assessment will be worked up so that the outcomes of that assessment can be fed in. There's a kind of feedback loop between the equalities impact assessment and the proposals, so that by the time both are finalised and presented to Cabinet for decision in the summer, the impact assessment has informed the proposals that are put forward and then represents, as it were, the final impact assessment on that proposal as it's being made.
Just to come in very briefly on that, I think it's also important to stress that, of course, because the sites we're talking about are very different, one of the reasons why there has to be a site-by-site EQIA, it's the right thing to do anyway, but of course the equalities impacts, or for example, redeveloping industrial estates in the borough in order to get more jobs on it, will obviously be very, very different from a complex piece of estate regeneration, which will have more profound impact in terms of equalities and more things for us to think about and work on. So that's why it needs to be done site by site, because the sites are really quite different, will have different equalities implications that need to be worked on.
Sorry, just two more follow-ups, actually, because I just need to be really clear about this. Okay, so the first one is about the lack of information we appear to have on some strands of some protected characteristics, as it's called in the jargon, and how you propose to get information about some of those things. It seems to me that to this moment in time we've been very much reliant on kind of census and other kind of like generalised information that we have about particular groups, and there are significant gaps in some groups. And I think in some communities who are in the target areas where all this will happen, they are quite difficult to extract information out of. And I'd like to know how you're going to gather information to inform your equality impact assessment from areas of the community who find it quite hard to trust the council and it's quite difficult to disclose some of those things. There was another brilliant question I had. Do you know, it's gone out of my head. So when I wake up at 3 o'clock this morning, I'm going to shout it really loud.
So on the question of how we gather the information, so the Council has a central policy team who are the people who advise on the process of producing all the qualities impact assessments across the Council. So obviously the teams working on the specific proposals for the sites going into the HDV will take their advice from that team. I mean, we do have a lot of data, particularly about when it comes to the kind of demographic data about the housing estates, because apart from anything else, as Councillor Strickland says, we've been engaging with the communities there for some time and have been building up an amount of kind of demographic information about the people we've engaged with over time. Where there are gaps in the information, we will obviously do our best to seek them out, and that's one of the reasons why you start the process early enough that you can begin to close some of those gaps as you go through.
Yep, so Councillor.
Okay, here we go. Right, for the moment, that is. Okay, yes, I remember it, which was actually, what if the equality impact assessments are pretty negative towards what's happening, or throw up a whole range of very serious implications which would have the most enormous reputational and other ramifications on the Council and its partners, and possibly, indeed, break the law. What do you do then?
I think if one did an assessment which showed a kind of wholly catastrophically negative impact, which whatever you did could not be mitigated, it's hard to see how we would bring forward that recommendation to Cabinet. But none of the work we've done so far suggests that there's a risk of that. Obviously, as we go through, you'll continue to keep an eye on that. But I think the more likely scenario is that where potentially negative impacts of emerging proposals come to light, we will change the proposals to mitigate those impacts.
So good, Councillor Connor, then Councillor Ibrahim.
Just wanted to be sort of just get a bit more clarity about the tenancy agreements that will be for people on the estate and when they come back to it. I've got several conflicting, well, I read it as conflicting, and maybe you can clarify it. At 6.5, you've got the council level social rent.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realise.
No, sorry, my fault. Yeah, let's wrap up the equalities bit. So I'm sorry. Yeah, so Councillor Ibrahim on that. Yeah.
No, I'm just conscious that it would be quite difficult if we go backwards and forwards on different themes. So my concern about the equalities impact is that the original document said, and I've raised this, and you know, I've had an answer on it, that once the sites had been identified, there would be equalities impact on individual sites. And you know, I don't think that's in any dispute. You wouldn't do an equalities impact on the whole thing because different sites have got a different impact. Now, for example, if we talk about Northumberland Park Estate, okay, now it was identified quite early on that that would be in the first phase, and you know it doesn't take a genius to work out what the equalities impact will be on Northumberland Park Estate, so I don't understand why that's not been done yet. You know, Northumberland Park Estate is not populated by lots of middle class heterosexual white men, basically, so ultimately we know what the equalities impact is going to be on that. It doesn't have to be catastrophic. I mean, for it to be negative in affecting so many different protective characteristics, I would have expected, particularly on that site, there to have been an EQIA by now. Okay, if we talk about the civic centre, that's slightly different. But if we're talking about the estate, well, I think, you know, I'd have wanted to see something like that sooner.
So, I think there's a distinction to be drawn between identifying, say, Northumberland Park as an estate for potential regeneration, which was done, for example, in the Tottenham Area Action Plan, as Councillor Strickland said, and that Tottenham Area Action Plan, when it was presented to Cabinet, came with an equalities impact assessment which dealt with the kind of principles of development on the sites identified in it. The equalities impact assessment that will come to Cabinet in the summer will be doing something slightly different. It will be talking about the equalities impact of some of the specific emerging proposals for how that regeneration would be pursued, which is something has not been possible to do up to now and is not possible to do now because it's not until this stage that we're about to enter that those proposals will emerge in enough meaningful detail to be able to do the work. The other important thing to say, of course, is that the equalities impact assessment for any site will really importantly, it will consider the equalities impact on the people currently living and working there. It will also consider the impact on people with protected characteristics who have the potential to benefit from what might happen there in the future. One of the jobs of the EQAA will be to balance some of those issues and come out with a kind of a balanced view about the equalities impact overall.
Right, we're okay on equalities. I mean, I'll just clarify a point then. I mean, the Northumberland Park Estate is in whatever it's called, phase 1 or whatever. So it was offered as a site that the various bidders should look at and make proposals. So does that mean that would it be possible for that estate not to be included in the first tranche of transfer?
So the position is, I think, that I think it's very unlikely that it wouldn't come forward to Cabinet in the summer for a business plan to be signed off. But as I think we've said before, the decision that's made by signing off the business plan is effectively a kind of conditional approval by the council to transfer the land to the HDV. But those conditions are really important and not insignificant. So in the case of Northumberland Park, the land can't transfer to the HDV until there's a planning consent, until the site is empty, so everyone there has been rehoused, until there's a viable funded scheme, all the necessary consultation has been carried out, and so on. The other important thing to say, of course, is that while it is definitely the case that we will bring that business plan to Cabinet, it is still at Cabinet's discretion to sign off that business plan and any other future business plan for any other site. And so there is no obligation on the Council to sign anything over. And the procurement documentation is very clear that nothing in the process of that's got us up to here and will take us through the next few months obliges us to do anything, including to set up the HDV itself, if the Cabinet chooses not to do so.
To add very briefly, is that remember that even after all of that's happened, and as Dan said, the Cabinet doesn't have to accept the business plan, even after all of that's happened, Dan, there's been further public consultation, it still has to go to the planning committee through the planning process in the normal way. So there are then further opportunities for councillors, residents and others to object or give views or shape what happens.
So effectively, the decision that the Cabinet might take in July or wherever is a sort of provisional decision to put that site into the vehicle, subject to a number of conditions being met, including, if one of those is including vacant site, planning. You're talking, you're not talking 6 months. You're talking, well, what sort of time scales are we talking if that positive decision is taken in July?
So, the short answer to that is it depends from site to site, but for a site that is the subject of complex estate renewal, it would be very likely more than 12 months, because you're talking about very extensive engagement with the local community and kind of in co-creating the plans, even before you get to a planning process, which itself has to be gone through. And there has to be a planning consent, i.e. an agreement by the planning committee, before the land can transfer. That's for complex estate renewals, that is a long time, you're right.
Right, I've got numbers of people indicating now. So if I can take Councillor Ibrahim, follow up on that one, and then if members, I'll take a quick round of right. I mean, I don't want to. I want to give priority to members of the committee as much as I can, because it's already 9:25, and we do need to go into private session. So what I'll do is take a round from members, and then I'll give a bit of time to members who are not on the committee to ask a question. But we do need to be aware of the time.
So I just want to follow up on that, because I'm trying to get this straight in my head. So if the development vehicle is set up, okay, there is no absolute obligation to put Northumberland Park into it or anything into it. But then the likelihood is very high, because you wouldn't have spent all this money on setting up a shell company.
I mean, I suppose just to say that in picking a partner, the council is seeking to pick a partner who we think we can work with, and who will deliver, good quality homes and business space and other things that we want. So it would be a complete failure of the procurement process if we did pick a partner, and every time they brought forward a design for a phase, we said, oh God, what have you done? So there is obviously an assumption in the procurement process that we're picking a high quality partner, but as you say, if the council is not satisfied with what's coming forward, we're not obliged to do that. And as Dan said, and I think this is a really important thing to emphasise, Chair, land is only transferred into the vehicle phase by phase, as we discussed, but crucially, land is only given to the company when there's planning permission. So it's not the case that land is given to the company, and the company can sit on that, think about it, can put in poor quality plans that we turn down, all the while that land is just sitting there being land banked. That's not the case at all. It's only once something has been agreed by all the different bits of the council that the land goes in. So that is a very significant protection in terms of the use of that land.
So I've got Councillor Connor. Any other questions from members? Councillor Hearn, well, I'll take a quick round here. So I'll do Councillor. Let me do Councillor Guinness first. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Basically, my question is about the tenant's right to return. I mean, I welcome the commitment of the leadership that if the residents wanted to come back to once the estate is rebuilt, they can do that. Having said that, can you explain what needs to happen for, like what kind of arrangement or agreement needs to happen between the council and the preferred bidder for that commitment to materialise, rather than just being a commitment on leadership part? And, sorry, my second question on that is, why is this not being part of the initial negotiation with the preferred bidder? Thank you.
The short answer to the first question is that the legal documentation which we've been preparing includes an obligation which all the bidders have accepted to adhere to the council's policy, and including, as it were, changes that are made to those council policies on housing and rehousing. So the current council policy, the current council policy does not offer a guarantee because it was written to cover all estate renewal eventualities, including those not pursued by the HDV. If the council, so one mechanism for achieving the outcome that you describe would be for the council to adopt a policy that was HDV specific that did require it, and then the bidders would, the Lendlease would be obliged to observe that. There are probably other mechanisms in that we could bake it into the legal agreements themselves, but there's more than one way to skin that cat, but it can definitely be achieved.
Okay, so Councillor Connor, I think following up.
Okay, I'm going to go back to my social rented question, but it does follow up on Councillor McGuinness's question. I've just got 6.5 and 6.7 seems to me slightly contradictory. You've got in 6.5 a clear commitment has been made that any existing council tenant that moves into a new home built by HDV or a new council home will be offered a new tenancy which will be as close as possible to the existing tenancy with the exception of right to buy and on a council level social rent. That's all well and good. But 6.7 says there's been no commitment that the new estates will contain at least an equivalent number of council houses. It is not and never has been expected that replacement homes built by the HDV will be owned by the council. So if we don't, we were talking about guarantees tonight, and if we don't own it in that respect, how can we then say that we've got this clear commitment to do to put people back in on the council level social rent, and how can we actually guarantee that? And I know you said that there's many ways to do that, but I think I just a little bit more clarification around that, because otherwise it seems that there's a hope, but actually the reality is that we don't actually own those houses. So how can we insist on that being a social rent? Thank you.
So the council won't own the houses, and crucially, if the council did own the houses, it wouldn't be able to make that commitment about carving out the right to buy. The council does own 50% of the company that owns the houses. So the council will, through a combination of the work we do between now and setting up the company and then afterwards, ensure that the policies which govern the way that those homes are allocated and tenanted and so on mirrors the the arrangements that exist for council housing. So, and that, again, that principle has been accepted by bidders, that the council's tenancy and allocation strategy and so on will apply to the homes owned by the HDV just as they're owned by the council. I mean, the specific point in 6.7 is just, I think, to correct misunderstanding that the homes that will be built by the HDV will then return to the council ownership. That is not the proposal. They will be held by the HDV, but other than the right to buy, the experience of renting them, the terms on which that happens and the rent you pay will be the same.
So, just to be clear, so in the next, if this all goes through and you've got that 5 months now to discuss this all with Lendlease, are you saying that you will be able to guarantee through a legal document that actually that the people who have left their council homes and their tenancies will be allowed to return to with a similar setup, and all the people that have done that will be, if they want to go back onto the same estate, can do that with those same tenancy agreements and that same social rent?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the short answer is yes. It has always been accepted both by the bidders and indeed in the earlier reports, including the Future of Housing report, that while these were not strictly secure tenancies in the way that you know them, owned by the council would formally contract with the HDV, of which, as Dan says, you own half of it anyway, and would make that agreement formally.
Right. So I mean, just to clarify then, because one of the points of the second call-in, I think, is that the sort of commitments which we're now hearing might be in conflict with the original procurement process, in that they're attempting to bring in additional demands, guarantees, and so on, which weren't part of the original process. So therefore, the process may be undermined in that respect, and present the possibility of challenge. So I think what I'm hearing you say is that's not the case, because those issues have been dealt with in discussion with the bidders.
So I'll just answer briefly, and Scott, the lawyer, will come in to answer fully. I think just to emphasise politically that throughout this process, the authority has been very clear in terms of what it's wanted. We have been very clear that affordable housing and re-provision of homes is an absolute priority. And we wouldn't have entered into this procurement unless we were able to push for that. To give you further reassurance and to explain how that's happened and how it works, I think it would be good for you to hear from the lawyer directly.
So just to clarify the legal position, we're entitled at preferred bidder stage to confirm, optimise and specify financial commitments and other terms contained in the tender. The commitments that we've been discussing are contained in the tender, including in relation to some of the construction stuff, which we'll no doubt go on to talk about in a few moments. So it's a case really of confirming and specifying exactly how those commitments operate in the legal terms. But certainly all the areas that we're contemplating and discussing have been referenced in the procurement process and therefore don't sit outside the procurement process.
I'll just take Councillor Ibrahim, then I'll do the members who aren't members of the committee. Sorry, yeah, right. I don't want to disadvantage people and bear in mind the time. So I'll take Councillor Ibrahim, then I'll take Councillor Hearn, then I will go around the other members. So.
In terms of the tenancies and in terms of the rents, if they're subsequent commitments that we've made after the end of the bidding process, were they in the original specification? So would we be able to, it's like, how do you optimise something that may not have been there in the first place? It has to be there to be refined. My second question is, and this is completely different because I'm conscious that I've got other people that want to ask questions, and it's on page 92 of the document, and it's on outside broadcasting facilities. So is everybody there? So in the first paragraph, it says bidders are asked to plan for outside broadcasting facilities for Tottenham Hotspur, and the site identified here is Northumberland Park Community School. Now, in this document, which is from some time ago, I presume, it was the original specification, that went out. So ultimately, if, for argument's sake, the HDV didn't go ahead, where would Spurs' TV bans go?
Well, so if the HTV didn't go ahead, the first question would be, would the council anyway want to proceed with estate renewal at Northumberland Park via another mechanism? Now, the Cabinet's already taken a decision that it thinks the HTV is the best way to achieve that, but the question of whether the HTV goes ahead and whether estate renewal in Northumberland Park goes ahead are two different questions. If the school were to stay where it is, and therefore the proposal that's set out in the procurement document cannot come to pass, then the council would have to have another conversation with Spurs about the other options. I mean, there's no obligation on. Well, you'd have to look for other options if there wasn't an opportunity to relocate the school. If what you're asking is, as it were, does the obligation to Tottenham Hotspur trump the obligation to the school? The answer is no. Okay.
I was asking if I was asking if the outside broadcasting facilities are dependent on the HDV being able to provide another site for Northumberland Park Community School, because we can't, as a council, afford to knock down the school and rebuild it somewhere else. Presumably, that's part of the deal, that the HDV pays for that.
The answer is no, it's not.
Right, Councillor Hearn.
Main area question is actually around risk, but just kind of like attaching myself to the end of that last question. What are the risks and opportunities of the relationship that you need to build between the HDV and Tottenham Hotspurs, and kind of connecting their ambitions together and how that works? But further, more importantly to me in some ways actually is I quite like to know what is your risk assessment mechanism. How do you calibrate risk? How do you deal with it? I mean, is there risks registers? How public are those things? How, are you really kind of clear about all the pitfalls there might be? I know we're supposed to spend all our time dreaming of beautiful things in the future, but we do need to look at the half-empty glass as well when it comes to this, because we could end up in a horrible place and costing lots of money. I'm aware that there's sort of some community saving for a judicial review, and there's been a bit of a conversation about that elsewhere. And I'm also very aware that Haringey Council has judicial reviews left, right, and centre all over the place. So it's not like it's a new thing. But what is your reaction to the kind of risks which could be damaging legal, long-winded action? And particularly, actually, how does the risk register or calibration deal with issues around our reputation as a council?
So if I start off, Chair, so in terms of the Spurs question, so as you say, Spurs are a major landowner in Tottenham, and we'll have to obviously work with the vehicle and cooperate with the vehicle, but it's important that there's no Tottenham Hotspur land in the vehicle, so that there's no sort of direct relationship, as it were. So the vehicle is not reliant on Spurs. The outside broadcasting land is the only sort of direct connection, and the estate renewal in Northumberland Park, Spurs are sort of kept up to date with that, but it doesn't involve any of their land, so the council and the vehicle can get on with that really in consultation with its residents. In terms of risk and information on risk, if I start on that, I know Scott wants to come in. I think I just want to reiterate the very clear commitment that I made at the Cabinet meeting recently, which is that while, of course, some things about risk, and this is normal practice for any report that goes to Cabinet, that our lawyers and advisors will advise that some of that information is exempt or parts of it have to be redacted, I did make a very clear commitment that as much as possible of the information around risk will be published. as soon as we can with the July papers. You know, we're being as transparent as we can about risk, and that commitment stands. But I think, Scott, you want to come in a bit more detail.
Yeah, from a legal perspective, all of the risk analysis that went on was then written into the legal documents. The purpose, part of the purpose, a big part of the purpose of legal documentation is to write down the risk and get the risk allocation in the right place. So we, as part of the procurement process, we put out to the market a set of legal documents which allocated the risk in the way that the council wanted to see that. And if I can refer you to page 109 of the pack, you'll see that the actual evaluation matrix against those legal documents assessed bidders' response against the risk allocation within those documents. So that's exactly how we were marking the bidders in terms of their response.
I'm inclined to pursue that just a little bit. Yeah, no. I mean, I think, and one of the callers in, if that's the word, referred to this. If something all goes belly up, you know, I mean, Brexit, you know, currency issues, shortage of skilled labour for construction, and so on. And I suppose the argument would be costs are escalating. What's our contingency in a sort of hypothetical situation like that? What's the way out? How soon is that triggered? These are the sort of things which I assume would be on a risk register, which we might then have access to at some point.
So if I start, Chairmanship officers want to come in with some more detail. I think so. We did cover this at Cabinet. I think one of the really important aspects of the joint venture model is that under a traditional development agreement where the council has already sold its land, if a developer says to the council, well, look, I'm really sorry, but we're a bit worried about house prices, we're a bit worried about Brexit, we're a bit worried about labour costs, and this has happened to other labour boroughs across the city, that developer, because they then own the land, is perfectly entitled to say, well, so we're just not going to build anything for a while. You know, we're going to land bank essentially and wait and see. And there's not a great deal the council can do about that. The key difference, of course, with this approach is that discussion about, well, actually, isn't the market looking quite tough? Should we change what we're going to do? And if we do want to make a change, what should we do instead? That all of those discussions will be had by the board, of which we're 50%. So it's not the case that the council, as would often be the case with these things, is just given a decision, you know, we're just not building. There would be a discussion at that board about, right, what are we going to do? And that would allow the council to shape what happens. So what's happened in some other areas, for example, when house prices have started to go flat and not increase as expected, you know, others have said, well, actually, why don't we rent some of these homes instead? Because obviously rental is much easier to get off the stocks. But the crucial thing is the council would be making those decisions. So if the vehicle, if the market really was in serious trouble and the vehicle did decide to stop building, for example, the council would have to say yes to that. It would be a joint decision. And that, I think, is a really important thing to say. Do others want to come in?
So in terms of the broad exit scenarios that the legal documentations envisage, we've spent a lot of time looking at those. Being lawyers, we spend a lot of time with negative scenarios. And there are two very broad situations. There are no-fault exit scenarios and there are fault exit scenarios. So no-fault exit scenarios would be where there's a deadlock, where the relationship breaks down, the objects are unaligned. A default scenario would be where the bidder, Lendlease, is in breach of something, has defaulted on a legal obligation. And we've worked through all of those scenarios in the legal documentation, and there are a number of situations that occur depending on the situation. Ultimately, you're in control of that. No more sites would go in. The agreements would terminate. The sites that were in there would remain in, and it would be wound up. But you also have a number of different rights in there to acquire back sites out in those circumstances.
Right, I'm conscious it's nearly 10:15. Under standing orders, we have to finish at 10. We can agree to waive standing orders to carry on. Do I need to specify a time, or do I just agree to waive? No, I think I can just ask the committee to agree to waive standing orders so that we can continue, because we do need to have a short private session as well. So I'm going to go round. the end of the table. I think it was Councillor Hare was indicating first, so I've lost slight track of which order people were in, but if I can, I'll take Councillor Hare first.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, sitting here, one just ends up with a long list of questions, and I can't possibly tackle them all. But I haven't heard much that makes me any happier about risk, because I've been on the Ali Pali board for a long time, and the risk register there is extremely detailed. We come to it at every single board meeting, and the level of detail in it is really very, very high. And I think were the same approach to risks taken with the HDV, not only would you end up with an even longer list, it would be actually a list that you could hardly exit from and proceed with, because there are such gigantic risks for the tenants, for the leaseholders, for businesses, for others. And if you actually put those risks down as risks that you're taking seriously enough to put on your risk register, then I have no idea how you would deal with them. So is the risk register effectively just taking the risks to the HDV itself? In other words, risk to council's reputation, risk of market downturn, etc. In other words, these are very actually surface risks. They're not the deep risks that we've all been talking about.
Okay, so if I start, and then I think Dan wants to come in terms of the detail to reassure, and that huge amounts of work has been done. So I think it's not the case at all. I think as we heard from Scott that risk work is not being done somehow. Places like Ali Pali have done more work than us. The reason we've got excellent external advisors like Scott is that, as Scott said quite clearly a moment ago, his main preoccupation is the risk, and is dealing with that risk and thinking about how to best capture that in the contract. But you're absolutely right to say, Councillor, that we're not just looking at internal risks, as it were. And obviously, one of the things the Cabinet has to look at and has looked at is, of course, the wider risk. There is clearly a risk of not being able to refurbish and significantly improve our estates, which need vital investment. There are significant risks to the borough of Wood Green Town Centre not having major investment, in part because it's likely, we don't know this yet, but it's likely that a Crossrail 2 station will come to Wood Green. The council needs to have a mechanism for delivering the very ambitious regeneration plans that are currently being consulted on with residents, but also there will be a clear expectation from Sadiq Khan's mayor, and he's made this very clear, that areas that get a Crossrail 2 station are expected to show they're bringing many more homes and many more jobs, because they need to, obviously, we would have to show that we're justifying the billions of pounds of public money that will be spent bringing that station. So I think it's important to stress that there are significant risks of not doing this, but my primary concern is not really about the council's reputation, it is about our inability to deliver on what residents have been telling us in Tottenham, and we will continue to work on our inability to deliver the real ambitions that people have been talking about in Wood Green. And I was the other Friday night at a meeting in my own ward hearing residents' views on this, where residents were pushing hard for regeneration, and their biggest complaint was, why can't it happen tomorrow, rather than why are you thinking about it? So the risks of not doing things are very, very significant indeed, in terms of not being able to deliver some of our housing strategy, not being able to deliver key bits of our growth and economic development strategy, and it is important as politicians that we take those risks into account as well. In terms of the specific question around the risk register and what is being recorded and reassurance that work is being done, Dan, I know that this is your preoccupation as well, and it would be good, I think, for you to emphasise again, as you did at Cabinet, what has been happening.
So I think that the kind of, in a way, one of the headline important things to say is that it's quite right to say that the decision to do this needs to be based on a really detailed understanding of the risks. The decision to choose a preferred bidder is not the decision to do this. And the decision to do this, which is the decision that will be taken later in the summer, will be accompanied by, as Councillor Strickland has said, a really kind of comprehensive description of where we've got to in the process that Scott has described, of hammering out how each and every individual risk is addressed in the legal documents and so on. I understand the frustration of a public procurement process like this, it's hard to give a running commentary. It's hard to describe, as it were, how we are addressing each one in discussion with multiple bidders and now with the preferred bidder. But it's absolutely right that the decision cannot and should not be taken until where we've got to is understood. And, of course, we make an absolute commitment to do that. We have actually this evening talked a little bit about how the legal documents at a high level address some of the specific risks, and we can continue to do that. What we can't do is talk about where they're going to end up in detail, because we just don't know that at the moment.
Okay, so I think I'll take Councillor McNamara was indicating next, or we're going to be very tight on time. I think we hear the points that you've made about risk. It's got to be what it. Well, it's 10 to 10. I'll take Councillor McNamara.
So, okay. Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick points. I'm pleased in the reference that you made, Councillor Strickland, or that, rather, Chair, that Councillor Strickland made in terms of attempts to limit the amount of documentation deemed as exempt. Obviously, that's welcome. And I'd like to ask, will the Council be publishing correspondence relating to the current or any future High Court action, including the response to the letter before action of 13th of February that I assume has already been issued, what with the deadline having been Monday 27th of February? I think that would be quite useful. I mean, it will end up, if it goes to the High Court, being in the public domain anyway. I think it would be quite useful for the committee to see it. I'd also just raise the point, and this is a concern, Chair. It's more of a point rather than a question. Clearly, going back to the original rationale for this call-in, questioning the Cabinet decision, minute 184, with regards to the appointment of the bidder, the Housing and Regeneration Scrutiny Panel report referred to legal risks relating to judicial review, equality impact assessment issues, consultation issues, and, I mean, we've heard referred to in responses these as either not being significant or insurmountable risks, and with, unfortunately, yet more assurances being made that these issues will either be dealt with later on or that they will be considered by other committees such as Planning Committee in terms of their domain, or will come back to Cabinet in July. And unfortunately, I mean, having listened carefully to all of the responses given so far, I'm no more reassured than I was when I made my presentation earlier that the required work to either get the core structures in place to make a scheme of this magnitude successful, or even to establish whether it will be successful, has been answered. So I'm sorry if that doesn't pertain as a question. So, I mean, I would ask what the response is to that I haven't heard anything to reassure me anymore as to the veracity of the decision made on the 14th of February and why that shouldn't have waited until after more work had been done on guarantees of affordable housing, governance, consultation. I'm still completely at a loss, and I genuinely mean that, as to why this work wasn't undertaken actually as part of the procurement process, so that with all these things having been resolved, we then put it to the three bidders. Because I'm still not convinced that there isn't a legal risk that the unsuccessful bidders couldn't challenge this, now that we've seen further assurances and further elements emerge.
Yeah, I mean, that was answered to some extent over there, I think. I mean, the point you made earlier, you know, do we have to do this now? Can we spend another few months teasing out some of these details prior to confirming our position with the preferred bidder? And the other point Stuart made as well.
So in terms of the first question, Chair, on what sort of legal responses and correspondence the Council would publish, I think that's a question for Stephen, who obviously is here from the Legal Service on behalf of the Monitoring Officer. In terms of the second question, on the July decision and more detail sort of coming in the February decision, and I think it is important to stress that because a call-in obviously presses pause on the Cabinet decision, the Cabinet has not yet made a decision on a preferred bidder, and it is, I think, two things to say. Firstly, it is normal that these much more detailed issues and really pinning down exactly how things will work do happen in this final stage of procurement and this type of procurement. But secondly, of course, and because we haven't currently got a preferred bidder, it wouldn't really make much sense, and it wouldn't be, I think, a good use of public money to, for all of those 3 shortlisted bidders, work out in intricate detail exactly how they might approach X, Y, and Z, exactly how we might agree different things with them, to have 3 different draft governance structures with 3 different bidders. Once the council has appointed a preferred bidder, we then can get into this much more detailed work. There is a significant amount of time to do that, and as Dan said earlier, and as I mentioned earlier, all of this would come to July Cabinet. If the Cabinet is not satisfied with what has been suggested, then we would not bring the report to that Cabinet meeting. But when things are brought to that Cabinet meeting, there will be significant amounts of information going to that Cabinet meeting, which will address many of your points. And at that point, if councillors still feel what's being proposed is not satisfactory, given their concerns, of course, you're perfectly entitled to say that at the time. Decisions, again, will be made in public, and the normal procedures will apply. But I think Stephen will probably need to come in on the legal question.
Chair, it is not the usual practice of the Council to actually publish responses to pre-action judicial review letters. And also, it is not within the remit of this committee to actually impose such a requirement.
Right, I was going to take Councillor Tucker, Councillor Carter, Councillor Brabazon, and that may be it before we need to do a quick private session.
Yes, the most powerful or emotionally affecting argument for the proceeding with the HDV, and we've heard reference to it again by Councillor Strickland, is basically that something must be done for the people in most housing need, the people on waiting list, the people in temporary accommodation. The problem is that if the HDV doesn't result in a significant increase in the amount of social housing, the position of those people won't be improved in any way whatsoever by the HDV. That is the only way it would do it, because so-called affordable housing, in other words 80% of market rents, is totally beyond the reach of those people. I see nothing in the responses that indicates that there is going to be a clear commitment to significantly increase the amount of social housing. Not only that, the responses to the question around even maintaining stasis and the current level of social housing, and I'm looking now at 6.7. The response points you in this direction. I'm going to read it. We recognise that not all our estates will be viable for like replacement in terms of the number of social homes. Decoded, there will be a reduction in the amount of social homes. Let's continue. We will aim to ensure that there is no loss of affordable habitable rooms. Aim to ensure. In other words, you build in the possibility of actually failing to ensure. And that's a serious concern there. We've heard from our officers and advisers that what the HDV can be held to is existing council policy. If we don't change council policy, that existing council policy specifically says there is no right of return on existing rents and tenancies. That's what existing council policy says. So what I'm asking for is this. Are we going to get an explicit, written down, guaranteed change in council policy to absolutely clarify 2 things? One is that as a minimum, on the new estates to be first of all destroyed and then rebuilt by the HDV, there will be at least an equal number of homes at target rents and equivalent secure tenancies to match the current number of occupied or potentially available council homes. That's number one. And secondly, will there be a change in council policy to absolutely ensure that there will be a right of return for existing council tenants on their current rents and equivalent council housing terms on their own estates? If we don't get those 2 guarantees, and if they don't become absolutely enshrined in council policy, then all the guarantees and commitments, it seems to me, are meaningless.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tucker. So I think it's not fair to say that the prime argument is that something might be done, as though the Council was sort of desperately searching around for an answer. I made clear that there had been significant thinking both on the regeneration side of the Council and the housing side of the Council. A cross-party member group has travelled around the country and has, at some length over some time, looked at lots of different options. Equally, the papers that went to the November Cabinet included 6 options, 6 different business case options. So, multiple documents have been published and have gone to Cabinet that look at this in some detail and really have taken a step back to look at what we might do. So the prime reason is that to deliver our plans, we do think this is the best way in terms of delivering that. But crucially, as I mentioned earlier, doing that in a way that does allow us to exercise ongoing guardianship over public lands and assets, that does give us significant control, that does give us a share of that profit, and does avoid the situation which the majority of London Labour councils doing regeneration have found themselves in, which is that the only approach people have used is simply to sell off private land and lose all control. Those, I think, are incredibly important differences. The second point I think is incredibly important to make is that nobody's ever suggested that the development vehicle is the only source of new affordable homes in the borough. Far from it. So when you look at the 5,000 to 6,000 homes that the vehicle would build, that does not include the 4,000 to 5,000 new homes planned in the housing zone in the Tottenham Hale area. That does not include the several thousand new homes that are on private land that would come forward in Wood Green. That does not include all of the medium sites which are coming forwards. And we saw at Planning Committee just 2 weeks ago planning permission for 200 new affordable homes granted by the committee. That's got nothing to do with the development vehicle. So the vehicle is part of the answer on affordable housing, but affordable housing will come from many sources, and it has to, in order for us to meet the demand that we've got. The next point to clarify is, and we've discussed this previously in these scrutiny committees, Councillor Tucker, that it is not the case that affordable housing is all at 80% of market rent. And as I've made clear to you repeatedly, the Council's housing strategy specifically sets out our expectations for affordable rents. It specifically says that we do not agree with the government's approach of charging everything at 80% of market rent, and what the policy makes very clear is that while we would be prepared to accept up to 80% of market rent, this is generally as a borough-wide policy. I'm not talking about any particular scheme. 80% on one-bed flat, because that is affordable within housing benefit. What the policy makes very clear is we find that completely unacceptable for larger homes, and that 2-, 3- and 4-bedroom homes, particularly the larger family homes, need to be at much lower levels of rent to protect affordable family housing. So it's absolutely not true that it's all at 80%, and I think that's it's also unhelpful because the Council has specifically taken a stand against that. In terms of the commitment to residents, Dan made quite clear earlier that this is likely to be baked into the legal agreements, and that is our intention. But what I cannot do this evening is make a blanket policy promise for all future estate renewals, including estates that the vehicle might do in 10 or 15 years' time, which we haven't even thought about yet, haven't even looked at yet. We've made specific commitments to Northumberland Park, which is the biggest estate that's been looked at, which is in Phase 1, which is obviously being looked at in some detail, an estate where there's ongoing resident consultation. But I can't give a guarantee tonight that an estate in 10 years' time the vehicle might be asked to look at will absolutely re-provide every social home, because I haven't got a crystal ball and I can't make those promises now. We have made clear commitments about Northumberland Park, but future estates will have to be looked at in the future. The policy is very, very clear. The policy is very, very clear that our aim, of course, is to re-provide all of the affordable homes. But as I say, I can't make promises for 10 or 15 years' time.
So I think just to clarify, we'll wrap up this bit quickly if I can, because I think Dan said that, I think he said there are many ways to skin a cat, and one of them is estate-specific policies or an estate/HDV specific policy, like I think what might be the case in Love Lane, say, and that is something that could be brought forward as separate or sort of an extension of the overall estates renewal policy, which makes certain commitments but is not estate specific. Does that sound?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. So what the policy makes very clear is that the aim overall is to re-provide all of the affordable homes that might be demolished as part of regeneration, but the policy also says that decisions have to be made looking at estates at the time, because as I say quite rightly, council policy, this policy might be in place for the next 10 or 15 years. Council policy can't predict what's going to come up in 10 or 15 years. So the policy aim is very clear, the policy objective is very clear, and as Dan said earlier, for this particular first phase of sites, what Dan said was there are different ways of doing this, but we will do it.
Councillor Carter, then Councillor Brabazon, then we'll afraid have to go into private session for a short period.
Thank you, Chair. I have several questions. I don't mind if they're not all asked because I can always answered. Sorry, because they can always be. I can always put in written questions later on. Homelessness. I'm concerned about homelessness. I accept that there's going to be lots of houses built under this HDV and that there is a housing crisis. But as part of the justification for the HDV, it is not directly linked, but it is implied that this is going to address homelessness and those on the waiting list. Now, I do struggle with this because I just can't see how this can happen. That's the first one. Second one, parks. There are two parts of, as you know, parts in two parks that have been described as on the borders, in literature. Now, will you first acknowledge that these are not outside the borders, but they're in parks? Why are they being transferred? And because that's a complete mystery to me. Two small parts, one is in Finsbury Park and the other is in Woodside Park. Okay, next one. Alan, you mentioned that in the Cabinet meeting last time that council estates have large negative, well, you didn't say large, you said negative financial value. I imagine you're referring to Northumberland Park Estate. I would like an answer now, if possible, on this one, because it's just a money figure. What is the negative financial value of Northumberland Park? Because it's got to be huge in order to balance out all the obviously valuable places, such as the place we're sitting in at the moment, that are being passed into the HDV. Last question. Lendlease are listed as a client on the website of Terrapin Public Relations. Have Terrapin PR at any point acted as a representative for Lendlease in relation to the HDV? I'll leave out the other questions, but there's probably 3 or 4 there. Take your pick. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So, in terms of your question on the waiting list and homelessness, what we need to remember is that while a lot of the discussion focuses on existing estates and the re-provision of homes and existing estates, quite a few sites that are proposed to be put into the vehicle, like this one, like various sites in Wood Green, currently have no homes on them at all. Well, and also, like the Cranwood site is another good example. So there are many sites that may be put into the vehicle, and some of which are in phase 1, which of course would have, where every single home built on this site, for example, is a net additional home. So every affordable home built on this site is an affordable home that didn't exist before, which will genuinely be available for people on the waiting list, will increase the supply of affordable housing in the borough. So That's why I think you have to separate the two. So homes built on these sites will be net additional, will create an uplift. That does give us more homes for people on the waiting list. In terms of the commercial properties and the parks, that's because there are 2 specific buildings, 2 small buildings in the parks, which are being looked at, but there's no decision on that at all. And there is, because I had some casework about this, there is internal discussions going about whether they're best managed by the vehicle, whether they're best managed by the corporate property service, whether they're best managed by the park service. That is very much an ongoing discussion. In terms of the values you asked for, all of the values that I mentioned in Cabinet are all printed in the Future of Housing Review documents that went to Cabinet. They've been on the website for a couple of years now. And in terms of which agencies act for who, I'm not going to get into detail tonight, so I'm not sure who exactly acts for who. But in terms of declarations and things like that, everything has been properly declared on the website in accordance with the regulation.
Councillor Brabazon.
Can I make just a couple of points, then I've got a question. One is regarding the building in Finsbury Park. It is clearly within the curtilage of the park. It is not small. It is the cafe. When I spoke to the owner, he had no idea. He told me he'd heard nothing about this, never received a letter. So I don't if that's indicative of consultation, then I think consultation needs to improve. I would like to say something about the equality impact assessment, if I might, Chair. It's not really a question, but it's an observation. The equalities impact assessment, which was attached to the Cabinet report on the preferred bidder, is dated the 20th of October 2015. So it's the equalities impact assessment from, I think, the November Cabinet report. Now, I've looked at this because I think this issue of the equalities impact assessment is really important. You said you've done loads and loads of work and so on, and I was listening to what Councillor Hearn said very carefully, because this equalities impact assessment has nothing in it. And it's just a series of assertions. And I just want to read you, if I might, since we're here, the last bit. The final impact analysis. It says, overall, the development vehicle proposal is considered to have a positive impact for disadvantaged and excluded groups, including those with the protected characteristics. However, individual schemes will need to be assessed as they're brought forward for their specific impact on equalities. Now, that is not. I have written an equalities impact assessment. It took me hours and hours and hours to do. These things are very detailed. This is just a blanket overall assertion about something which has a massive impact on people's lives. And I just think that all the issues we've raised, Chair, about equalities impact assessment alone require this to be paused and reviewed. My question, so I've managed to get 3 points in. My question is regarding the invitation to submit final tenders document, which is attached in the bundle, in the papers. And it does go back to what Councillor Ibrahim was saying about outside broadcast facilities. Because in this, on page 92, it says that as outlined by Tottenham Hotspur during dialogue. So I'm assuming that Tottenham Hotspur has had dialogue with somebody, don't know who, but it sounds to me like it is with you in relation to the HDV. That is the inference I've drawn from that. And it is particularly concerning because it regards Northumberland Park School. And it goes on to say, ask the bidders to come up with early designs for a new school somewhere. And I'll just ask you how linked that is to the maps, which are elsewhere in another document regarding the lease that has been given to Tottenham Hotspur, the 99-year lease for outside broadcasting, which shows chunks of land on Northumberland Park School site which need to be used for outside broadcasting facilities, for in particular for the Champions League and the NFL. Now, I'm no expert on football, but even I know that the NFL makes billions of pounds. So, and there is reference here in an introduction to the report that Spurs need that, for they're going to make a lot of money. So how does all this link up? And especially since Northumberland Park School is listed as the first, is a key imperative for the regeneration scheme, the early delivery of a new school. Is that for Haringey? Is that for Spurs? Who's that actually for? All this disruption for a school, where is that school going to go? I've heard, by talking to people on Northumberland Park, that they've been told it's going to be over there. When they pointed over there, they were pointing to Willoughby Road, which is where Charles Bradlaugh House is. So all of these things are very concerning. You're saying, well, there aren't really plans, but just my reading of this, that I'm only reading an extract, there do seem to be plans, and they're asking bidders for plans. So could you clarify how this is all linked up with this issue around the school, around the estate, and around the need for Spurs to have their outside broadcasting? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So in terms of the commercial portfolio, as was mentioned at Cabinet, all of the commercial tenants were written to in November. So if particular owners didn't get a letter for whatever reason, we can certainly look into that, but they were certainly sent. Secondly, in terms of your questions on the Equalities Impact Assessment, I won't go into that in detail. I think we did go into that in some detail earlier. And I think officers were very clear about the different stages of Equalities Impact Assessment and why the earlier ones, obviously early in the process, were very broad and very general, but how the detail is very much to come. And then thirdly, in terms of the outside broadcast space, again, as was mentioned earlier, there is no final decision on this. The report on the top of page 93 says very clearly the authority has not agreed any commercial terms or the basis on which this will happen. And in terms of the school, and I think we talked about this, Councillor Brabazon, the other week, there are initial plans with the school that have been discussed with the school. I've had meetings with the Northumberland Park Ward councillors, which Councillor Weston, the Cabinet Member for Children, has been in. So, plans are being discussed with ward councillors, with officers from different departments, with the school. But as I said, there's no final plan at the moment.
Okay, I think we're going to adjourn to Committee Room 1 for a quick private session. Councillor Hare, Councillor McNamara join us in that one. And then we'll come back. We'll be in recess for a short time and then consider how we're going to frame our recommendations on that. So we'll then come back. But we will take a bit of time on the private session, I'm afraid, which we have no option but to do. Thank you. And questioning, but we're almost at the end. Got a set of recommendations I'll go through. The committee should note the advice of the monitoring officer in his report on the agenda. Do we note that report?
We do.
Do we agree then with the call-ins and with the monitoring officer's recommendation that the decision under review does not fall outside the policy and budget framework?
Agreed.
Agreed. Next decision then is whether we refer this matter to the full council, bearing in mind the points we made earlier in the evening, that the full council's role in this respect is either to agree the recommendations or to refer it back to the formal decision maker under council procedure, which is the Cabinet. So I'll put those in favour of referring this to full council. Me. Those against? That falls. Next issue is do we refer this back for reconsideration at the Cabinet? And I'll put that as a recommendation and then a list of further recommendations that we'd seek to make to the Cabinet. So those in favour of referring this matter back to Cabinet for reconsideration? That's agreed. Got a set of recommendations for Cabinet, specific recommendations for Cabinet to consider, which I'll attempt to read out, and they're scrawled in my handwriting, which, if anyone knows my handwriting, will agree that there may need to be a little bit of work on the wording of this before, as we absolutely finalise it with the committee team. The first recommendation is, and bear with me on this, no agreement to put any sites into any HDV without a full equalities impact assessment. Agreed? Yep. No agreement with any HDV partner without agreement of specific policies in respect of Phase 1 sites to be going into the HDV, guaranteeing right of return on the same terms and conditions, including policies around eviction, to be agreed with the tenants affected, taking into account current conditions and requirements of those tenants. Agreed. Next one is no agreement with any HDV partner without effective arrangements to ensure value for money in respect of any what's that? That's construction exclusivity arrangement, including independent assessment. Agreed. Yeah. Got to try and. We're on.
Just for clarification, when you refer to independent assessment, is that something that can be elaborated on?
Site, whether the exclusivity arrangements site by site represent value for money, that decision should be subject to independent assessment by an independent advisor.
Independent of?
An advisor independent of the parties.
For clarification, the right of return, I didn't quite catch whether that covered tenants. Okay, and leaseholders.
Well, and leaseholders on similar arrangements. Yeah, I mean, these wording will have to be slightly tightened, I suspect. Yeah, no, that's right. I'm trying to find where I put the next one. Where have I put the next one? So this is EQIA's. Right. QIA, no answer to sites. Oh, right, so it's 40. Yeah, that's right. That's. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's right. So on the point, right, we note the concerns, the serious concerns raised on blacklisting, and we would recommend that the Cabinet enter into discussion with relevant trade unions to reach agreement with any preferred bidder and subsidiaries in the construction side of the arrangements to ensure that appropriate arrangements are in place that will ensure arrangements like that never happen again. Yeah.
So it's to enter into one of the concerns that we had was that when the allegations of blacklisting was made, it only appears as though the council spoke to Lendlease. We'd like them to speak to trade unions actually about those historic allegations as well, and it to be a balanced perspective, and obviously, like you said, to ensure that there are procedures in place to mitigate against that.
Sorry, no arrangements go forward with any HDV partner without commitment from the construction side of the partnership to local employment arrangements, skills and jobs training, specifically for equalities groups, including training and job support for disabled people. Agreed? And was that it? Sorry? Target rent. No. Yes, right. The other point was about rents. And I'm not going to quite find this, I don't think. But the recommendation is that Cabinet should seek... no. Cabinet should ensure no loss of target rent properties on Phase 1 sites going into any agreed HDV, and should seek to ensure a minimum of 50% genuinely affordable housing on those arrangements.
Yes,
is that right?
So to
Good.
ensure that all target rent properties are replaced.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Was that just for phase 1?
Yeah, recognising that these come in side by side, as it were. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's it. Was it?
Yes,
That's
that was
it on our recommendations. So those all agreed?
Agreed.
Yeah. No. I can't really hear. I can't hear what you're saying, Isidore. So if you need, we've been through our recommendations and made agreement and come to agreement on those. So. We've agreed. That's right. We've agreed to refer back to. Refer to Cabinet for reconsideration with a set of recommendations. Yeah. Good. We need just to thank you, and that's that bit of the meeting. We need to agree the terms of reference for the continuing scrutiny which will take place by the Housing and Regeneration Scrutiny Panel. Now, these are to establish and provide recommendations, and this is scrutiny work which will start as of now, just about, to establish and provide recommendations on the feasibility with the proposed joint venture model of council housing tenants, council tenants being rehoused on rent matching that of an equivalent council property and on the same terms, according to their choice, either on the estate or elsewhere in the borough, according to their choice. To establish and provide evidence and recommendations on whether the HDV can deliver a tenancy and eviction policies which protect vulnerable tenants in the same way. So this will flesh out the recommendations we've made. To establish and provide recommendations around overcrowded tenants being offered replacement property of an appropriate size to fit their need. To further establish and provide recommendations on whether financial arrangements of the proposed HDV adequately protect the council's interest. And to further establish the risks of the venture and make recommendations on whether those risks can be adequately mitigated.
Yeah, agreed.
Agreed. So those terms of reference agreed. Good. Thank you.
Chair, I just thank you for your chairing and say it's very pleasing that we managed to finish on the same day that we started. Just.